Well, hey,
Okay.
this is Luke Reiner calling in from Wyoming, and I'm gonna just start by thanking really Ashto Caroline for setting this thing up, and Texas Caroline for being there to help shepherd us through. Hey, listen, should be a nice event today. I wish I was down there, but I'm here in Wyoming. But lots going on in our transportation business, in our freight business these days. Certainly, IJA has changed a lot of what we're doing, but so has fuel prices, and so has inflation, and so has the list keeps going. And it is good to gather, and it's good to talk through the issues. And I think there's a really nice panel of speakers lined up, and I know there'll be great participation. So with that, look forward to participating from here for about an hour and a half, and then I'm going to have to disconnect. But with that, look forward to participating for a while. And to you there, Texas Caroline.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, Secretary Luke. Thank you for being with us virtually this morning. And we have several people in the room here. And then, of course, we have lots of folks joining us online. So good morning and welcome everybody to the special committee on freight meeting, our spring meeting with at the AASHTO spring meeting here in New Orleans. A lot of you online are missing out on great weather, great food, and just great entertainment here in New Orleans. But as Secretary Luke mentioned, really as transportation professionals and freight professionals, we are facing a lot of complex challenges of really, one, planning for and facilitating safe and efficient movement of goods throughout this country. To really maintain quality of life for many, many people. A lot of people depend on what we do every day. If you're like me, I have 3 boys and they eat pretty well and fast. Milk and bread and all the essential stuff doesn't stay very long in my house, and that's part of the supply chain issues. My husband goes to the grocery store several days a week. But that said, that's the life of each American family, and mine and yours are all facing the same complex supply chain issues, and that really puts all of us in the center of what this country is facing today. We may not be necessarily the ones that are making, the policy decision or the private sector that are making the decisions, or the folks that are the farmers, the folks making raw materials, all of that. But we find ourselves in the middle of that. That we are having to figure out how do we partner with all the stakeholders and find solutions from a transportation perspective and a multimodal transportation perspective to help the nation address that. But within our different states, we have complex issues. I come from Texas. If you don't have lettuce, know that it got stuck at the border crossing, because 80%, 90% of our produce comes through to Mexico and through Texas border crossings. If you don't have some of the other commodities, probably sitting on a ship somewhere in LA Long Beach. So just think about all of those. And so we find ourselves as state DOT, planners, engineers, et cetera, that we're in the middle of a very complex transportation issue that I think we're going to face for a very long time. But also, Secretary Luke mentioned IIJA, lots of opportunities there. How do we, sitting around this room and online, figure out how we, leverage the opportunities created by IIJA on many fronts? And I won't go through all of it, but I wanted to highlight a couple of things. And Secretary Wilson, who is the current AASHTO president, is focusing a lot on that, equity issues. And I'd like to tell people equity is different from from diversity, because equity is really focusing on the benefits and the impacts of the transportation system. And in our case, freight is certainly a big component of that. How do we address that, in what we do? Secretary Wilson is also focusing on partnerships. As I mentioned earlier, as freight professionals, we partner and work with a lot of folks, private, public sector, federal, state, local. We work with all of them. How do we, do that is going to really be what propels us to address future issues and not current issues. And then the other one I mentioned this in our last meeting, automation. It's coming whether we like it or not. A lot of it, we're talking on the trucking side, but automation on our ports, railroads, automation in the warehousing, all of that those are the things that we need to look at. And how do we embrace those as a lot of us now are developing or updating our freight plans? What are those components that we really, include there? So some thoughts there as we go through this meeting, think about that, and certainly what the committee can be doing to, help all of us at our different states on how we better address freight from a multimodal perspective. And I have my friend Doug here from the military. We are a military state, and we've been working with DoD for several years and really thinking about the needs of the various groups when we really talk about freight, that they're really different, unique aspects of what we do to be able to address some of the needs that we normally don't think about, like military. So with that, I will turn it over to AASHTO Caroline. We have a few people in the room. Caroline, do you want us to do a quick intro?
Yeah, yep. We could do a quick intro in the room, and those online, just put your name and your department in the chat.
Awesome. So we will start with you, Doug, and please use your microphone.
Yes. Well, good morning. My name is Doug Briggs. I'm a civil engineer that runs a program called Highways for National Defense for the Department of Defense. I focus on key issues for the military for across the U.S. We have important roadway networks like the Strategic Highway Network. And what I'm here mostly today to hear about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that talks about states now need to consider a little bit more about military freight within their freight plan. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Ron Pate, Washington State DOT Department of Transportation. I'm the Rail Freight and Ports Director, and we also have JBLM, a very big military base in Washington State. So we're very interested in that as well.
Oh, good morning. Cheryl Ball with the Missouri Department of Transportation. I am the Waterways and Freight Administrator. Once again, we sat together, a big military state ourselves. So we're finishing up our freight plan. So I hope we did it well. And good morning.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Hedges, the Director of Cooperative Research Programs at the Transportation Research Board, and looking forward to reviving the Freight Cooperative Research Program this year funded through the IAJA.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Camille Crichton-Sumners. I work with TRB and the National Cooperative Highway Research Program as well.
Good morning, I'm Wade Moorfield. I'm with the Maritime Administration. I'll be giving a presentation later on our federal update. And it's nice to hear a lot of interest in the IIJA/BIL.
Hi, good morning. My name is Carla Roche. I am the business manager for the West Virginia Department of Transportation. So essentially CFO functions for not only the rail, but also our aeronautics, highways. So just very interested to see how all this will come together for our state.
Sorry. Oh, all right. Once again, good morning. I'm Paul Patney. I'm with the Arizona Department of Transportation. I'm the Multimodal Planning Director, and I just recently replaced Greg Byers. So this is my first AASHTO meeting, and nice to work with everybody. Great.
Good morning, Elisha Wolf with the Michigan Department of Transportation Specialist, and it's great to see you all here. Thank you.
Morning, Craig Thompson, the Wisconsin Department of Transportation, and just newly named the chair of the Waterways and Freight Committee. So good to be here.
I'm Susan Howard with AASHTO.
Shane Gill with AASHTO.
Catherine Molesky with AASHTO.
Sorry, we aren't able to hear you. I don't know if folks are talking right now.
Yeah, the folks on the line can't hear. So if you can speak up a little.
I can just hold it. I think they probably hear you.
Yeah.
Good morning, Rod McDaniels, Utah DOT.
Good morning, Dan McElhenney, Idaho.
Chris Knoll, TxDOT.
Sid Mohan with the NC Choppy program.
Matt Dietrich, Ohio Rail Development Commission.
Robin Ayers, TxDOT.
Okay. Yep, Caroline, I think we got everybody in here.
All right, great. So I'll just take it to the next slide here. So our agenda, hopefully it's up on the screen. We'll just have a legislative update from our my AASHTO colleague, Susan Howard. We'll follow that with a federal partners update from FHWA, FRA, and MARAD. We'll have two guest presentations, and then we'll end off our meeting like we always do with hot topics and state DOT updates. So with that, I will kick it off to Susan Howard for the AASHTO legislative update.
Thanks, Caroline. Hi, everybody. My name is Susan Howard, and I am the Director of Policy and Government Relations for AASHTO, but I used to have Caroline's job. So I may remember some of you. I used to be the committee liaison for this committee and the Council on Water Transportation, and then most recently worked for in the funding and finance portfolio for AASHTO. So I'm pretty new to this job, just a few months, but not super new to AASHTO and not super new to transportation either, as my gray hair will tell you. But I appreciate the chance to come and talk with y'all today, provide a little bit of an update on what's happening in Washington. And I know y'all are going to really delve into probably get into some IIJA really detailed stuff, but at a high level, kind of let you know what's going on with implementation and the focus both on the Hill and with the administration. To start off, I guess, as always, we kind of sort of live and die by the appropriations process and the budget process, and that got off to a much delayed start this year. We had, we didn't really have final resolution on a federal fiscal year 2022 bill until March-ish, and that was certainly, well, maybe not unusual because that has kind of been the pattern lately, but to be 6 months into the fiscal year to have this massive reauthorization bill in the IIJA and to have to be in that kind of holding pattern until we had the full obligation limitation to spend those contract authority dollars meant that we were really in kind of a period of suspended animation for a while. So that sort of had a ripple effect in that the president's request for fiscal year 2023 was delayed, and Congress is just now kind of starting to do the intense work of working through a budget resolution and then a fiscal year 2023 appropriations package. The budget resolution is never done on time and sometimes not done at all, but it is important in setting the both domestic discretionary and defense discretionary budgets and providing those kind of top line levels to the appropriations committees in the House and Senate so they can begin to build their bills. Of course, transportation is unique in that because we have reauthorization, we know the broad parameters, but there still is a lot of discretionary spending as well. So we'll be looking for that. Secretary Buttigieg has been up on the Hill quite a bit, testifying on the budget request. He'll be in front of the House Transportation Housing and Urban Development Subcommittee today. And last week he was over at Senate Commerce, and he's also talked to Senate appropriators. And you can imagine some of the common things that have come up: inflation, workforce, fuel prices, some of the kind of things that you all are hearing and thinking about on a day-to-day basis. One thing also that's, I think, kind of notable about this cycle for appropriations, one, it is an election year. We have midterm elections in November, which never bears well for getting much done before midterm elections. So I'd expect that we will see another continuing resolution and wrapping that up after the midterm elections, where we may see a change in party in both the House and Senate. Also, a number of notable retirements. Both the Senate Appropriations Chair and Ranking Member are both retiring. Senator Shelby from Alabama and Senator Leahy from Vermont. And my former boss, the chair of the House Transportation HUD Subcommittee, David Price, is retiring after many years in Congress. And also Chairman DeFazio with the House T&I Committee. So there will be a lot of sort of leadership changes coming up. The other thing that's notable, I guess, about appropriations is the return of congressionally directed spending, or earmarks. And many of your agencies have probably been very heavily involved in that over the last year or so, when the decision was made to bring back earmarks. They didn't end up being in the IIJA, but they were in the fiscal year 2022 appropriations bill. And the intent is to continue that through fiscal year 2023's legislation. So there's been some guidance published. I think the deadlines are individual to the different subcommittees, but probably rapidly approaching. And there have certainly been some attempts to rein in or provide some guardrails to earmarks so that it's not the Wild Wild West like it used to be. So hopefully local communities are working with their state DOTs to find the right projects that are ready for federal investment and moving that forward. But that certainly has been, I think, a real shift after not having them for over a decade, to go back to that process of earmarks. When it comes to IIJA implementation, I think we're very, very slowly beginning to see discretionary grant notifications. As you all are probably aware, one of the big ones was the combined notice for infra raise and the rural grant program. Doing that under a combined application, that's certainly a tack that I think the administration is going to try to take to attempt to streamline things a little bit more for applicants. Also, you'll hear a lot from the administration about a focus on capacity building and technical assistance for smaller communities. Under the IIJA, there are a lot more eligible grant recipients, communities and towns and counties and lots of other entities beyond just state DOTs. And that's always been the case, but this is just on a much grander scale. So I think the administration is looking very carefully at how they can help ramp up to try to provide that technical assistance, probably looking at many of our state DOTs to help in that effort as well. So I think that's something important to keep looking forward to, or look to, when we're looking at the discretionary grants. I think we're just beginning to kind of dip our toe into rulemaking. There have been some significant notices out so far, but it feels like the tip of the iceberg. AASHTO will be very, very busy over the next year or two beyond, compiling and responding to requests for comment, notice of proposed rulemaking. So prepare yourselves to hear from us a lot, to get your input as we try to weigh in with the department on the structure and the implementation of so many of these new programs. When it comes to congressional oversight, I think we've heard from both the House and the Senate that they want to start doing implementation hearings over the summer. Now, what that will focus on, I think, remains to be seen. I think different committees will have different perspectives on what they want to really know, and not just what they want to know, but what measures they're using for success for implementation. From the appropriator side, it's certainly going to be obligating money. From the policy perspective, that's really going to vary, I think, depending on the committees and their focus. But I expect that we'll begin to see some significant oversight and implementation type hearings from the House and Senate coming up in the next few months. The other thing, the major thing, that I would mention, when it comes to sort of the state of the economy and workforce issues, are huge. Last week at the Senate Commerce Committee, when Secretary Buttigieg testified, he spoke directly to issues of truck driver shortages, as well as essential air service and small, rural flight pilot shortages, both of which would certainly affect goods movement in a significant way. So we're seeing these, these things continue to play out. We're also seeing, increased prices for diesel. I think hit an all-time high last week of $5.37 per gallon. That's going to exacerbate supply chain issues. As you guys probably know, there's been a lot of debate at the state level on fuel tax holidays and relief for consumers. Has not taken off as much at the national level. There's certainly been some interest, but I think, recognizing the status of the Highway Trust Fund and the revenue that comes in through our gas and diesel taxes and the ability to keep that sustainable, there's been a real kind of a pushback on that idea of doing something at the federal level for the federal gas and diesel taxes. But you guys are certainly experiencing that in your states, and many states have explored or implemented gas tax holidays in an attempt to provide some relief to consumers, which we can certainly understand why that would be necessary. A few things to keep an eye on. We may see a couple of supplemental funding requests, another COVID package potentially, and then a Ukraine package. There may be some transportation related elements to those. In particular, there is, as you may remember, there was relief provided through the second COVID bill to states and localities, and transportation was an eligible expense, but not directly. There is an attempt to get some language there to firm that up as an eligibility and also allow states to use that for match. That's part of the COVID package that has not really crossed the finish line yet, but could be, is in the works and could. So I think that kind of stuff will continue to see some movement on rather large packages outside the normal traditional appropriations process to address some of these ongoing issues. Just look back at my notes and see if there's anything else I was going to mention. Buy America, we're going to be talking about that in depth, I think, at Council on Highways and Streets and at the Transportation Policy Forum, because there are new requirements coming into place and new guidelines for waivers for Buy America and Made in America. And again, I think EV charging is another one that we're just in a lot of states are working on, and we'll be talking about at some length, I think, throughout this meeting because of the new funding available through the IIJA. But I think that about wraps it up. I'm happy to take any questions that anybody has, and appreciate you giving me a chance to provide an update. Thanks.
Yep, thank you. Thank you, Susan, for that. Any questions in the room?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not an expert on Buy America, but I'll do my best. Yeah, for sure. So two things kind of were happening concurrently. There was a specific request for comments about Buy America related to EV charging infrastructure, because it is, because there's this desire to ramp up very quickly. We do have supply issues there in terms of domestic sourcing for many of the materials and parts and components that go into the structure and use of the EV charging. So that there was a request for comments on that back in February, I think, kind of on its own track. And then more recently, what's been released are newish requirements for waivers, 180-day waivers for materials and components. And I think ASH is working on comments for that. I think they're due this Friday, and then the rule goes into effect on Saturday. This is the way, this kind of timing and sequencing is really bizarre, but is going to be the way things are because of the statutory requirements of IIJA not lining up with the capacity and the ability to move things quickly. So it's kind of a weird situation where we're submitting comments, but then the rule will go in effect. But then you have to kind of go backwards and figure out if there's changes to be made. But essentially, I think ASH's position is that 180-day waiver is not necessarily going to be enough to move the needle. And we're hearing a lot from states for particular components that are now going to be subject to these requirements that haven't been in the past, and that may cause delays and trouble for sourcing. So it's going to be an ongoing concern. And it's not just DOT, it's across the federal government. So there's a very specific piece to this with DOT and our modal partners as it relates to, construction materials, components for fleets and EV charging, but it really is a across the board effort led by OMB in this new Made in America office, which I think we're still figuring out the roles and responsibilities for. Thanks.
This is Catherine with AASHTO. Just a reminder, because we're getting messages online that they obviously can't hear because they're not in the room. So if you guys can just use the microphones, and then I know it's hard because you guys are in the perimeter of the room and we don't have a roaming microphone. So, and then also if we're going to answer questions, just to repeat the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, of
No
course.
worries.
Okay. Any other questions for Susan in the room? And I don't see any question online. So Caroline, we can move on. Susan, thank you so much. I have questions. I'll probably ask you offline. So
Oh yeah,
appreciate it.
I'll be here all week. Thank you.
Yes,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Thanks for your
Yeah,
time.
thank you. Caroline, AASHTO.
All right, thanks, Susan. And next up, we'll start with our federal partners update. And I believe I see Caitlin Hughes on the line. So Caitlin, I will give the mic over to you.
Hey, thanks. Is it audio or video too?
Whatever you're most comfortable with.
Love to turn my camera off, but I'm sorry I'm not there in person. It's great to be part of an AASHTO meeting again, though. It's nice to have a bunch of folks in the room. There's a lot of detail that I could go into on the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, but you've had some great summaries provided to you by AASHTO already. So I'm not going to delve deeply into the law, just give you an update on where we are on some of the provisions that are probably closest to your area of emphasis. As I heard already, many of you are underway with your state freight plan updates, which is fantastic. Just follow that statutory language. I know we do not have guidance out to you yet, but I can assure you that we have all been working on it. And that the idea is to support you in your efforts to get your state freight plans done on time. The state freight plans have a number of new components that need to be added to the update, courtesy of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And I think we were calling them 7 items, but the last one's really a bundled group of unrelated items. So make sure you address each of those individual elements of that final category. That's the one that includes it's got the wildlife crossings and emissions impacts and so forth. So look forward to seeing those plans. Some of you have plans that have already expired, and we've been in touch with you. You unfortunately may not continue to program your NHFP, National Highway Freight Program dollars, if your plans have lapsed from the prior authorization period. And the way that happens is you all had different lapsing dates based on when you turned them in and then finally when we approved them. So the operative date is when we approved them, and it was 5 years from then. For your next plan, that will expire in 4 years. You'll have a new date of expiration. If you are in that in-between phase, we have talked to you and we know that you're working diligently, and we will turn around your plan within 60 days, hopefully within 30 when we get it. It comes to us and then we share it with our counterparts at the FRA and the Maritime Administration, as well as the Office of the Secretary. If you have any aviation stuff in there, we'll also share it with FAA. But that is a multimodal plan overseen by the Office of the Secretary. To remind you, if you're new to this, you need to submit it through your Federal Highway Division office. I think we're not aware of anyone for whom this is going to be a protracted process. You're all working very well on this. I'd like to add too that we know that some of you have recently stood up state freight advisory committees to get more input on the process. Congratulations to those of you who have new committees, and those that had old committees and you're just reconstituting them or planning your next meeting. We're happy to come speak at those virtually or in person. We really think they're a critical part of making sure that your plans are comprehensive and reflect the state of practice of freight and the industry needs and concerns. Just check the guidance, check the statute rather for the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. It does expand the list of organizational perspectives that should be represented on a state freight advisory committee. It also establishes qualifications for advisory committee members and I think broadens that universe. The other thing the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law does is look at multi-state freight corridor planning. There were only a few states that really delved into this with their first state freight plan. It was new to everybody, and you were trying to get the core elements of the FAST Act in it. So we understand, but we really encourage you to try to get broader this time around. Look at corridors, look at your neighboring states' plans, and maybe work together with them on covering some of those cross-border issues. The law recognizes the right of regionally linked states or other agencies with interest in a significant multi-state freight corridor to enter into multi-state compacts to improve the mobility of goods. So that could be something you speak to in your state freight plan. It also establishes a program to provide grants to multi-state freight compacts. So more on that as we roll out guidance, but we think that there's a lot to like in the new law, a lot of things that can help you, frankly, with your state freight plan programming when you get to the freight investment plan component. And I will remind folks that last part where you talk about how you're going to program your National Highway Freight Program dollars, that's the section that tended to trip people up when they submitted a state freight plan and that freight investment plan component either wasn't there or wasn't fiscally constrained. We're pretty open-minded. If you want to just fiscally constrain the projects that are using National Highway Freight Program dollars, in other words, make sure they're going to be in your STIP, make sure that you've got match identified for those projects. Other than that, you can go big. You can add other, nice to have projects that are going to be funded with only state dollars, or projects that you might prospectively pursue grants for. We just basically need the NHFP component of it to be fiscally constrained. So those are great tools, the freight investment plans, for communicating to the public sector and the private sector where your emphasis is, where are you going to put your resources, where do you see a need to grow your freight system in your state. There are some changes throughout the law, not just in the freight sections, but throughout the existing programs that can help you bring more money to the table, because actually the National Highway Freight Program is one of the few things that didn't grow. It was renewed, which is good. That Congress validated the need for it, but they didn't add new dollars to the NHFP beyond the level that you saw under FAST. So if you want to do bigger projects, you can bring in some of those other Fed aid programs. They've been expanded to include some freight eligibilities. And I'm not going to go through those in depth today, but I think, just take a look at things like under the safety programs, there's changes to the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program. There's changes to CMAQ that add some great multimodal eligibilities. There's changes in the climate and resilience programs, in the bridge program. We have new equity programs you should look at, and also a bunch of great discretionary program expansions. They codified RAISE, as you know. MEGA is a new program with a good tie into freight, since it's looking at some multimodal programs, and also certainly renewed infra with a few new eligibilities. And then there's the rural program. So many avenues to pursue additional funds. As you know, also the establishment of a multimodal freight Infrastructure and Policy Office in the Office of the Secretary is a key element of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. I believe that was in AASHTO's legislative proposal, so you got that. So the agency will be standing that up. We don't have any news to announce on that right now. I think probably your best point of contact is Ryan Endorf, who's going to be speaking to you later on our supply chain report from the agency. There are also new components to the National Freight Strategic Plan, adding in elements related to the impacts of freight movement on environment and rural, underserved, historically disadvantaged communities, resilience, decarbonization, and economic growth. A lot of these tie right back into your state freight plans. So, as you develop your plans, do that crosswalk to thinking about how this would play out nationally, how your state can be a part of that, whether it's to reduce supply chain backups or maximize your economic development. We're here as a resource go to your state's Federal Highway Division office if you would like more training or technical assistance in any of these areas. And then stay tuned because we have a number of products coming out. We will have some questions and answers that will be posted on the web related to the National Highway Freight Program. I covered the main one, which is, can I use it if my plan lapses? And the answer is no, you can't obligate additional funds for new projects if your plan has lapsed. So that guidance will be coming out, as well as we have an updated truck parking funding eligibility memo, and that we think will be of great use since the state freight plans now require an assessment of your truck parking capacity in your state, with, I think, the unspoken hope that you'll program some of your NHFP dollars or some other funding in the state for truck parking expansion. So we think the truck parking funding guide will help because it's going to tell you all of the different programs in the under the Department of Transportation, predominantly federal highway, that are eligible for truck parking. I think we do mention a few FMCSA programs. And then what kind of projects might be eligible? Are they capacity? Are they emissions reduction and so forth? So I know that guidance is very close to coming out. I'm happy about that. We're also still continuing to run facilitated truck parking workshops. If you'd like us to convene one for you, whether you're a state or an MPO, happy to do that. And we have another product coming out, which is the truck parking design guide. That was briefed to you in December. We had great turnout from states. We modified the draft to include the things you asked for. So that should be coming out soon. And that helps localities also, in addition to states, really look at how to design these truck parking facilities, preferably in partnership with the private sector, to maximize the delivery of different services. Talks about charging stations. It talks about avoiding and combating human trafficking, as well as how do you reduce NIMBY issues with truck parking design. So look forward to that coming out this year. The other products that have recently been released that are out there already, the latest freight analysis framework product was the 5.3 truck flows by state. Hopefully you got to take a look at that. That should help with your state freight plan. A couple other things that will help with your state freight plan are the Freight Mobility Trends tool, which we put out a few years ago to show you where there is reliability issues, bottlenecks in layman's terms on your network, what the cost of those bottlenecks is. And now a new layer was added this year from the Moves 3 data. So you can see what the emissions are that are associated with delays in your state. That could also be useful in answering some of your state freight plan requirements. We're also developing a tool on National Highway Freight Network mapping, which will be nice because it'll show all your designated critical urban and critical rural freight corridors. I think that one's still in clearance, but if you have any questions about your NHFN segments and CUFC and CRFCs, you can certainly reach out to my office. Chandra Bonzi can help you with that. The law expanded the miles you can designate for CUFCs and CRFCs. I think it's sufficient that you probably won't need to redesignate facilities, take off the designation and put it on something new after you use NHFN dollars on it, if that's why you designated them, was to get eligibility. In any case, I think there's probably sufficient mileage that you don't need to do that, but you can stay in touch with us on that. And lastly, just as you look to the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, there's a lot of money in terms of discretionary and formula for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Still have the constraint of not commercializing facilities on the interstate right away. I recently heard from trucking industry entities that they're aware of that, and they do like to charge at private sector facilities as well. So that's why it's a great, it would be great for you to convene a meeting with the truck stop operators in your state and kind of talk through what their plans are for charging and how you guys might be able to partner on that. So I've really probably exceeded the amount of time for federal highways to speak, but happy to stand by in case you have questions, and appreciate your collaboration in meeting these various needs.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. Any questions for Caitlin in the room? No? Ashley, Caroline, you see anything online? Any questions for Caitlin?
Nope, not seeing anything online.
Okay.
This is Janine from Georgia DOT. Hey,
Hi, Janine.
Caitlin.
Hey.
Y'all are rocking it up there. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I wish I could be there in person, but we're going to tap into all those resources you're providing to us, and just really appreciate all the hard work that you're putting in and expertise as well.
I appreciate your leadership in Georgia, and also what you did when you were at the department. Really got some things moving, and I think helped keep freight on the front burner. I will say, you know, if you can't find anything that I mentioned, any of these tools, let us know. I admit the freight website is not very user friendly. It hasn't been refreshed in years. We do have a new tool with a much nicer way of finding the information. It's in clearance, but not in clearance the way some things have been in clearance for years and years. I'm certainly hopeful that this one will come out soon and be more helpful to you. But if you do need help tracking down any of that information, just give us a call.
Thank you for that. I recall the clearance process, and I do not envy you. And I'm sorry I'm not on video mobile today, but thanks again.
I see a
Caitlin.
question in the chat. Oh, Luke, yeah.
Yeah, hey, thanks. And so just a quick question for you. Thanks for being on today. As you know, certainly lots of electric issues in IDIA that we're working through. In the world of heavy freight, do you see coming an increased push in hydrogen or another fuel source, you know, other than electric trucks?
Yeah, that's a nice question. I like that because I've long been interested in alternative fuel vehicles, actually dating back to 1998 when I was last at USDOT. So I think I've seen industry representatives talking about their hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. I think without naming any names, there's at least one big one that's doing this. There is a challenge there in that, not just for hydrogen, but also for other alternative fuel trucks, there is an extra weight associated with that technology. And I think people are familiar with the provision in law that allows for an extra 2,000 pounds above the 80,000 pound weight limit if you have electric vehicles. You know, if you, and also provision for auxiliary power units to accommodate the additional weight. But what I'm hearing is that some of those other technologies are significantly heavier than 2,000 pounds. So the challenge becomes the fact that the infrastructure wasn't designed to handle, you know, like say a 90,000 pound vehicle without some changes to the spacing of the axles, the number of the axles and so forth, without creating significant effects on the bridges, which of course can compromise them over time and add to wear and tear on pavement. So, you know, at just throwing these things onto the roadway, if Congress were to allow heavier vehicles, it would have a significant impact on the infrastructure. And we have not done another truck size and weight limit study. We do have an internal multimodal group looking at truck size and weight research across the department and across the nation to keep our eyes and ears on the evolution of what's known and becoming known in truck size and weight. But you know, the challenge is whether a trucking company is going to want to reduce the payload to accommodate the hydrogen or electric or other technologies. Now, when you have states driving forward on this with zero emissions, you know, that's going to set up an interesting dynamic. You know, and depending on how it's implemented. So will fleets be able to have a mix, and will they, you know, to meet the overall emissions requirements, and then can they tailor perhaps the lower emission vehicles to certain payloads like lighter goods that don't tend to weigh out before they cube out? It's really going to be interesting to see. That's another good question you might put to your industry folks, the trucking community in your state. But I do think that hydrogen is certainly real in terms of trucking. And, you know, depending on how people are able to find a good operational design domain for it and square it up with the size and weight laws in their state, if they've got waivers, or across the nation, if these trucks are going to be leaving the state. We'll have to see.
Sure. Hey, thank you. Ripple effects everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. That's why I like the question, because it's so layered. You have to think through all of the components and the externalities. So there's no perfect solution, but I do applaud the manufacturers. Personally, I applaud them for coming up with new ways of moving goods, to be energy efficient and reduce emissions. So hopefully, some of these things will figure themselves out. That's not code for, we're changing size and weight law. So don't run back and say that. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think as a nation, we'll have to work through these many goals and issues. I'm going to jump to the chat for a second if I have time, because there's a good question there. Will there be a time extension on freight plans? Unfortunately, Congress didn't give us a grace period like they did in the FAST Act, under which you would still have your old plan be active while the new plan is being developed. So we can't extend your previous freight plan. You will lapse if you do not have a new one approved by us before your 5 years expire from the date that your original one was approved. So plan to turn it in at least 60 days before the expiration of your approval letter on your first plan, so that we'll have time and you won't be lapsing. It just means you can't apply your NHFP dollars in that time frame. So, I think hopefully you won't miss any construction windows, but just keep going. And then if you want to just get them in, satisfying the core new elements in a very not cursory way, but sort of your first best effort at satisfying it, and then you want to come back later and improve it with successive updates, that's fine too, as long as you've covered the topic in some way. When are you required to have a new representation of certain groups on the freight advisory committees? That is a question we have not tackled. Most things are required to, unless they have a date of implementation, like 120 days from the date of enactment of this law, blah, blah, blah. That provision doesn't, I believe, say when the new representation would kick in, which means it should kick in as soon as the law is enacted, or as soon as you stand up a state freight advisory committee, for those of you who haven't had one. But there just isn't really a penalty, I believe, for not having that. But I think the point is, the more you improve your representation, the better off your planning will be. You'll just have all those extra voices at the table to help you consider the different impacts of your freight program. So, do your best to get that on there and get those committees engaging with you. Let's see, another question. Final draft 2045 plan completed late 2021. Yeah, okay. So I think we've talked to most states. I don't know where Brian's from. Brian, are you able to tell me where you're from?
I'm from PennDOT.
PennDOT, okay.
Yes.
Okay. So do you recall when your plan expires, your original one?
I just sent that note off to some folks about 15 minutes ago, and I haven't heard back yet.
Yeah,
but
I have a
we're getting
list.
pretty close. Okay.
Yeah, I think you are. I have a list. Most people's most states expire in October or November, some in December, but there are a few coming up in July. As I said, just go ahead and complete your plan. I don't think the guidance on state freight plan is going to come out until June or July. I think that was the target that the Office of the Secretary is shooting for. It has to go through some layers of clearance as well. So I would just say press on, try to get the core elements answered if you're in that June or July expiration timeframe. For the rest of you, it's probably worth taking a look at the guidance.
I'm sorry. We were under the impression we could not submit until after the final guidance was issued.
No, absolutely not the case. You can submit today if you want. as long as you have all the elements in there. If you don't have all the elements addressed, we will kick it back to you and say it's not responsive to the statute. So just make sure that you cover all the elements. And then, like I said, if you've covered them, and for example, say you don't have a new truck parking assessment done, and it's not going to be done for 5 months, you could probably provide the information you gave us in 2018, 2019 for the last Jason's Law survey as an initial foray into providing truck parking assessment information. And then we would probably find your plan responsive to the law. And then you can go back and add newer information once you've conducted and completed your parking assessment. Hopefully that gives you some good tips on how to get your plans done. Okay, good. Brian confirms that in the chat. Any other questions? And Ryan Endorf is on the line. Ryan, if anything doesn't square up with where you're headed on the guidance, just jump in.
Yeah, I think the key is that you've addressed all the requirements. I mean, again, the target for submitting for producing the final guidance is June, July, recognizing, as Janine has full experience of, that the clearance processes can be, again, this is something that the White House had put in their report action plan about getting the guidance out. So I do think the clearance process will be fairly quick, but we're still working on it. I do think you should submit. Certainly if we review it and think have some questions about one of the elements and whether we think you've done enough there, then at least we can begin the dialogue and try to get those approved in a timely fashion.
Thanks for that input, Ryan. Well, I've taken a lot of time. We have some great counterparts here from, yeah.
We have one last question in the room. So and it's Bart. Bart, go ahead.
Hey, Caitlin, Bert Psycho, how are you?
Hi, Bert. Nice to hear from you.
One of the questions or comments that you made earlier when answering the question on alternative fuels made me want to maybe comment, get your feedback, but at least let this group know that in the legislation, there's a provision for a cost allocation study to be done.
Yeah.
And that is a study that is not funded. And given everything that we're going through, it might be worth for all of us to collectively figure out how is the best way to get that work underway, because it's a subject that keeps coming up, the wear and tear on our roadways, and your answer of your question made me think about that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's super nice. As always, Bert Psycho, thinking of others. The cost allocation study may not be funded, but we're working on it. We'll get it done. We've got research dollars within Federal Highway that we put to various initiatives. So I am not aware of a concern within Federal Highway about being able to pay for the cost allocation study. However, the caveat being, it's not mine. I'm not developing it. It's being developed out of the Office of Policy. And I have asked them to engage with us because of the freight relevance. So we do have collaborative meetings set up with them to talk about the cost allocation study. In fact, I think I have one tomorrow. So it is progressing. I wouldn't worry. There will be outreach to the states and others on the cost allocation study. So never fear, that is moving along. But okay. I think offering pooled fund solutions for other issues that are not funded or not even addressed is a great way for states to get additional research done where you can't or don't want to take it on individually. You think it has a national impact, or at least a very widespread multi-state impact. You can always come speak to Federal Highway about standing up a pooled fund study to contribute to funding for research.
Okay. Yep. Thank you very much, Caitlin. We will move to the next speaker. But before, the folks in the room, there's a sign-in sheet going around. Please make sure you sign. I think there's 2 of them going on around. Please make sure you sign so we know you're here. I know some of you came in later. But Caroline Ashto, I will turn it over to you to introduce our next speaker.
All right, so before I hand it over to Stephen O'Connor from FRA, I just wanted to mention to those in the room and online, speaking to the state freight plan. So the AASHTO Committee on Planning, their professional development subcommittee, they're hosting a webinar on Monday, May 23rd from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern, and it's going to focus on changes to the state freight planning. So while the webinar will feature kind of a high-level overview of the changes to state freight planning, we would like to focus the majority on the webinar on how states are navigating these updates with their state freight plan. So whether your freight plan expired, you aren't allowed to obligate your NHFP funds, or if your plan expires within the year, just like Caitlin mentioned in October and November, we like to highlight how your state is working through this process and get a dialogue going with the state. So if you're interested in sharing a 5 to 10 minute update of what your state is doing, please let me know. You can email me. You can also email Kyla Elzinga of AASHTO, and we'll be able to put you on the agenda. So with that, I hope I hear from a couple of you, and I'm going to pull the presentation up here for FRA. So just one moment, Stephen.
Well, I will say good morning, one and all, while we're waiting for the videotape to run.
All right, should be up on the screen.
Yep, terrific. Thank you. And you'll walk us through, Caroline, it's a short presentation, chock-a-block full of large numbers and a daunting schedule of activities ahead relative to our discretionary grant programs. So you'll have a copy of this with all those high figures, and happy to respond to questions, if not here and now, via email or a phone call thereafter. We're just finishing up on 2 of our FRA grant programs, the CRISI, the Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvement Grant Process. The number of applications, qualified applications we received this year for FY21 is about just shy of double what we've normally gotten, and a harbinger of things to come, I believe, for that program. We should be announcing the awards for CRISI FY21 within a week or so, I believe. We're also finishing up on the FY21, fiscal year 21 Fed State Partnership State of Good Repair grant program as well, and that will the awards to be announced. We're just finishing the evaluations in the next week or so, within a couple months for that, and you'll see that on the schedule we'll talk to. Caroline, if we could go to the next slide, please. So here's the near future for our FRA discretionary grant programs. CRISI, a whopping $1.6 billion, and we have separated out through the IIJA a railroad crossing elimination program, which will go alongside CRISI in the NOFO that will be announced here over the next couple months. The current CRISI had a separation of grade crossing programs, trespassing enforcement programs for law enforcement agencies, etc. So now we have a solid block for future grade crossing elimination. Onward to Fed, this is all FY22 funds that we're looking at. The Fed State Partnership, a significant amount and program change here, given the IIJA's distinguishing the Northeast Corridor and moving lots of grant money that would have gone directly to Amtrak into the Fed-State partnership. So a daunting $7.2 billion, the sort of that will be in finalization, but probably upwards of a billion for the non-Northeast Corridor, and the remainder of that significant amount for the Northeast Corridor, working with the states to provide those applications, and we'll be awarding those grants to. Restoration enhancement for establishing or restoring intercity passenger service, $50 million for the new year that we're upon. And finally, and very important to all gathered here, is the Interstate Rail Complex. I wish it was more money relative to the other programs, but $15 million for Interstate Rail Complex for administrative costs, conduct railroad system planning, for the promotion of intercity passenger service. Caroline, if we can go to the next slide, which will give us our schedule ahead just for this year. On the bottom line, we have the activities that are currently have taken place in the first 3 slots there. Our listening sessions, our BCA webinars, and the analysis and framework development for the identification and development of the corridors for intercity passenger service. So the schedule ahead, as I mentioned, Chrissy, possibly any day now for the awards to be announced. The next in line will be the railroad elimination, the crossing elimination program, to be the NOFO to be announced in June. We then have in June also the Northeast Corridor Project Inventory Notice for comment, which will be published. August, the Chrissy NOFO to be announced. August, September, Fed-State Partnership selections to be announced, should be by August. Come October, we have the new NOFO for Fed-State Partnership, the non-Northeast Corridor portion of that. Then we will announce the formal Northeast Corridor Project Inventory, and followed by the NOFO for Fed-State Partnership Northeast Corridor. On to the next slide, please. So just highlighting Chrissy in particular here as to the eligible projects. We have our standard, I'll call them standard capital projects that you as participants and applicants are well familiar with. And then alongside of that, some of this is already in play, and we have some new elements, if you will, of project qualifying under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and some very interesting pieces that we have grown and developed through the Chrissy process over the year, particularly in workforce development, research, safety programs, and the Safety Institute with the short lines, and regional planning activities. New to from the bipartisan as further measures that prevent trespassing, preparation of emergency plans for hazardous materials transported by rail, and rehab or procurement of locomotives, that activities that provide significant reduction in emissions, hence battery electric, potentially hydrogen alternatives for locomotive operations. Regarding equipment, we also accept and allow for other rail-related equipment applications, whether it be rolling stock or maintenance would be eligible as well. I would point out, along with their criterias that have evolved with the Biden-Harris administration on environmental justice, racial equality, et cetera, we are in the Chrissy NOFO going to identify as an evaluation criteria impact on the supply chain. And I'll speak briefly after the next two slides about supply chain in very brief form. Next slide, please. I'll take you to the overall DOT programs. This is not by year, but the overall IIJA authorizations for the mega projects program, which will be on the same NOFO, which we'll identify here in a moment, with the infrastructure rebuilding America infra that you are all familiar with. Combination over the 5 years of the program of $29 billion for those programs. We also have RAISE, which is before us currently. The applications are in for RAISE for FY22, and I believe there's just shy of 1,000 applications for the RAISE program this year. Pretty daunting. And then we have SMART grants, which are of particular interest to you, I believe, and new programs. Provides grants to conduct demonstration projects focused on advanced smart city or community technologies and systems in a variety of communities to improve transportation efficiency and safety, and a $1 billion dedicated to that over the 5-year period. And to the next slide, which will take us a bit more into the mega infra and rural grant. Multimodal projects discretionary grant. There'll be a new acronym for that to be finalized, but something we'll be calling like RAISE, like infra into the future. Mega funds projects that are too large, complex. That's the $100 million plus projects. Infra, the established program, and breaking out in this program rural separately for $300 million in of the 2.9 for this program for this year. Ryan Endorf and Darren, who are going to be on later, can elucidate more so on this program if you do have questions. And I'll just wrap up with the final slide on just identify where you can find out more information on these programs. I said I'd mention briefly supply chain. As many of you might be aware, the Surface Transportation Board came out last week with a demand from the four largest Class 1 railroads in the U.S., CSX, NS, UP, and BNSF, for service improvement plans, a array of new metrics to understand better their service performance, and metrics also on their employment, their training programs. They're particularly focused on the train and engine personnel of the railroad. Railroads are really on the hot seat at the moment. Service has degraded pretty much across the country, primarily in the Class 1 operations. supply chain issues, ability to grow with the current the commercial demands of their business. So they've really taken their turn in the hot seat. We FRA have a and this will grow into further activities, a twice weekly meeting with two of those class ones on the West Coast, looking at the Port of LA and looking for solutions and day by day understanding of where improvements can be made, and better communication facilitated with the port operators, with the chassis operators, with the ocean carriers, with the big box store beneficial cargo operators. So FRA directly involved in trying to help solve and prepare for future growth and fluid movement of goods and freight in the United States. I was out in Los Angeles last week for the entire week, spent it in the Port of LA and the Port of Long Beach. I must say it is an impressive operation, and I give full credit to all participants there. It's a very complex operation and facility, and you don't realize it till you're there and you see it, and you tour the rail yards, you tour the port facilities, and talk to workers on the ground, and each of those functionalities. It is daunting, but impressive. 40% of the nation's imports come through that port. It's pretty amazing. And with that, I'll close it off to questions, or save the questions for the end and give Wade a chance to get his speech going. Thanks, Caroline.
Yep, thank you, Stephen. Any questions for Stephen from the room? If not, I do have a question. I know, a lot of FRA focus is, right now on the class 1 railroads. You talked about Port of LA issues, but I'm from Texas. We have border crossing rail issues in Texas. So wanted to ask you, are you also looking at that? Because we have really capacity issues, of the rail lines, because they're single track. And the second thing is really the inspection issues that, inspection and crew changes and all of those things on the southern border compared to the northern border. So wanted you to comment on that a little bit.
Yes, as far as the grade crossing issues, and I know that's the significance of them to Texas, and this new, shall we say, expansion of Chrissy, hopefully will go a long way. It's not a overnight solution, but go a long way to helping improve upon that. And I do understand, I mentioned because I was there and it's the hot spot LA, but I realize there are issues in Houston in particular now on congestion and service that we're focusing on as well, with the same railroads that I mentioned before. It's top of mind to not just focus on the ports, but the inland terminals of Chicago, Kansas City, Dallas, Houston. So we are involved directly with that as well. On the border crossing, we have a twice monthly meeting with the rail regulator of Mexico to look to solutions and improvements on cross-border flows and the management of that traffic there, and dealing with commercial issues such as the taxation on rail, but not on truck, that for traffic destined for Mexico. So yes, we're working on all those fronts. I'm not sure that answered your question directly, Caroline, but we're on that as well.
Yeah, no, it definitely answers somewhat, and we're looking forward to the opportunities that Christie and other grants offer, because we have 10,000 at-grade road crossings in Texas. So definitely, it's going to be a focus of ours to see opportunities to help us address those. And certainly, you know, like you mentioned, a lot of our urban areas have a lot of at-grade road crossings, and those creates a lot of conflicts as well, and certainly a safety issue. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Quite welcome.
Hey, Caroline. Yeah, so Ron Pate, Washington State. Thanks,
Ron.
Stephen, for your presentation. I have to throw in, you know, our Seaport Alliance in Washington State, the Asian Gateway. Railroad's very important to us. We're kind of concerned with, we're seeing, you know, the ability for trains to get in and out of ports. We have major passenger programs. I hope FRA, when we're looking at, you know, new grants, passenger programs, how we're going to keep the freight trains running as well. There's a lot of, you know, long distance service restarting for Amtrak, which is great, but let's make sure that it all works together. I think that's something you're going to be looking for in your rail plans. And then what we're seeing is that it's really tied up to with container traffic chassis, no containers, and the flow that railroads want to go back and forth. And then I'll mention the precision railroading discussion that's going on and effects. And I'm sure you guys are looking at that. And I guess that's more of a question to get your thoughts on how that might be affecting crewing, rail yards, because I know there's been some changes, some more with other railroads than others, but how that might work, or what you guys are looking at with what the railroads have done. I'm sure STB's looked at that as well.
Yeah, I mean, on that final point, we are looking at that. You know, the railroads did very well going into COVID, and PSR may have helped them more so in the downturn, if you will, to reset the table for service, but it has not possibly worked as well coming out as the sunshine has shown coming out of the pandemic. They might say that, you know, things would be worse without PSR, but we are looking at the aspects of it, particularly such things as, you know, the asset availability, whether it be locomotives, well cars for intermodal, really concerned about the agrarian community and the lack of service they're getting for, in particular, for planting season for feed and fertilizer, and you know, long trains. We're looking at that quite specifically for, you know, not only the implications of the supply chain and the fluidity of goods and freight, but also any potential safety impacts. I know it, you know, we as communities see it as a nuisance block crossings, but are there greater considerations that need to be brought to bear on that practice, which basically came out of precision scheduled railroading? And by the way, our new Deputy Administrator, Jennifer Mitchell from Virginia DOT, will be out in Seattle next week at the Women's Transportation Conference and be speaking to a lot of these issues. She'll be giving a speech at that time.
Yep, my boss and I are scheduled to meet with her. So.
All right,
thanks.
great.
Oh, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. I think no other questions in the room. I want to give some time for Mara to provide their input. So thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate it.
Quite welcome.
Yep. Okay, AASHTO, Caroline, we can move to the next.
Alrighty, pulling it up, Wade.
Thank you. I think I'll be able to keep us on track because a lot of the topics that have been covered so well by Caitlin and Stephen, they're in my presentation, so I'll be able to kind of skip over those. I do want to say thank you. My name is Wade Moorfield. I'm a transportation industry analyst in the Maritime Administration in the Office of Ports and Waterways. I'm not a freight person per se, but AASHTO was kind enough to invite me to give this presentation here. I'll be speaking to the Council on Water Transportation this afternoon. So thanks for the opportunity to be here. It's nice to be traveling again. Next slide. So I'm just going to run through a quick update of some of our activities. Discretionary grants, I think we've heard some about that, but we do have a couple of MARAD ones. Some of the guidance and funding guidance that's out now from the administration and the funding criteria for some of those grants as they're evolving. A little bit of state freight planning talk about as it relates to maritime, and then talk about some of our MARAD research activities. And then I have a ton of useful resources in the presentation. I presume the presentation will be provided. If it's not, I'll be happy, just reach out to me and I'll send it to you. So next slide. So yeah, I have to talk about our mission. Sorry. But as you can see, the topics that are in our mission right now, as it evolves, align very well with the current administration priorities. And I think everybody's seeing this kind of everywhere now. We're talking about reduced emissions. We're talking about sustainability. We're talking about electrification. We're talking about, modernization. And specifically, I think it's what Ryan and Darren will be talking about. We're talking about U.S. competitiveness and expediting flow of commerce across supply chains. So these are all the things that we're looking at as we carry out our office activities. Next slide. So I'm not going to talk about the other US DOT infrastructure grant programs. RAISE is already closed, so I don't think there's any need to talk about that. And then the combined NOFO that went out, all that closes on May 23rd for infra and mega and the rural program. I don't think we've talked about that, but that's another big focus. But anyway, as far as port and maritime specific infrastructure grant programs go, I don't know. I presume everybody in here has kind of probably heard about the Port Infrastructure Development Program, relatively new, huge boost in funding. I think we did like 250 million a year for the past few years. So 450 million through the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, and then another 234 million through the FY22 approach. So a big bump in funding. That NOFO closes May 16th, and we're doing it all at one time. So it's going to be a very, very busy time. And then, so there's lots of, with that, there are some new eligibilities in the Port Infrastructure Development Program that are specific to kind of our mission and some of the new administration priorities, specifically about environmental and emissions mitigation and resiliency. And then just remind this audience that states, of course, are eligible applicants under the PIDP program. You can partner with, ports or private entities or whatever. I don't think we typically, other than some of the kind of, state chartered port authorities, we don't typically see a lot of state governments applying for PIDP, but that is certainly an opportunity. Oh, and I guess I'll mention, I don't think anybody else mentioned it, down in some of the other US DOT infrastructure grant programs, some of those do have new eligibilities for funding where you can actually match the federal funds with other federal funds. So that's kind of new. So I'm sure if you have people working on that, they'll know what I'm talking about. America's Marine Highway Program, near and dear to our heart at MARAD. It brought me to MARAD back in 2011. 25 million through the bipartisan infrastructure legislation and another 14.8 million through the FY22 appropriations. That's a big bump for that program. Typically they get about 6 million a year if they get anything a year. And so American Marine Highway Program grants, the NOFO that's out now closes on June 17th. And those are for grants for designated projects on designated marine highway routes. I'd be happy to talk about the Marine Highway Program with anybody here that wants to know more about it. Carolyn, you can go to the next slide. So these are the designated routes. And I will say that I thought it was interesting what I heard Caitlin say about multi-state freight corridor planning and multi-state compacts. I think the Marine Highway Program may be well suited towards that kind of activity. I'm not sure, but it sounds like an opportunity. Currently, we have 29 marine highway routes on 41 states, and we also include some of the Pacific and Caribbean islands and Hawaii in those routes. So the Marine Highway Program is growing. And I think we have 54 designated projects right now. And so it's starting to gain some steam. That's from zero in 2009. So next slide. So these are the updated federal guidance that's been pushed out for the discretionary grants. I think it's important to touch on equity, climate change, Buy America, Build America. I think it was kind of been talked about a little bit about the Buy America, Build America. We have OMB leadership on that with the Made in America office. There's an executive order, and OMB has some guidance out. So we're hoping that this activity will kind of simplify. With ports, we run into a lot of confusion sometimes, or not confusion, but complexities. With Buy America, with what you would think would be very simple items, don't meet the standards. We try to work that out, and hopefully there'll be an improved waiver process, although we strive to not do waivers, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. Climate change, there's an executive order, and the Center for Climate Change at DOT is now the Climate Change Clearinghouse. There's a lot of great resources on their website, as you want to see there. And then on equity, talking about barriers to opportunity, underserved populations, we have the Justice 40 initiative. If anyone's familiar with that, that's where 40% of program benefits are to go to underserved communities. USDOT just released a USDOT Equity Action Plan. There's an executive order. And then on May 25th, there'll be a virtual information session about transportation equity. We're seeing these more and more we're seeing these issues having higher and higher profiles in grant administration reviews. And it seems to be the way things are moving. So we encourage everybody to, review the guidance and do the best you can. Next slide. Some state freight plans. MARAD does review state freight plans. We do that in cooperation with FHWA. They're the lead agency. As Caitlin gave a very good presentation this morning, the bipartisan infrastructure legislation has updated state freight plan requirements. And there's new guidance coming out. I think I heard June, July. That's the Office of the Secretary is handling that. There are a couple of new elements related to ports, maritime, and specifically the stakeholder outreach, the state freight advisory committees. And then one notable thing is that the threshold increased from 10% to 30% for your National Highway Freight Program apportionment to be used for freight intermodal or freight rail projects. That's a big bump there. And then MARAD, we offer best practices guidance on the maritime components of state freight plans, and I'll be talking about that next. So next slide. So I'm not going to go through these, but these are the criteria that MARAD uses to review state freight plans for maritime components. And we've done this for a while now, and we also offer feedback to state DOTs, kind of a best practices presentation. Maybe some of your state DOTs, we've given that presentation to your freight offices or your kind of waterways offices. We are always looking forward to doing that. We have a very good presentation that just touches base on all of these different criteria and where we feel that they have been best identified, and this will be evolving with the new standards from the bipartisan infrastructure legislation. Next slide. This is from our review of the state freight plans. The purple states are the ones that have used National Highway Freight Program funds for port and waterway projects, and then the blue are other funds that have been used, other state funds that have been used to fund those projects. So we're just kind of just trying to see where the trends are going. Next slide. This is probably, I do want to share this. So we look at the questions that I shared, how we review state freight plans, and we actually kind of, tally those up to see, kind of, high, medium, low about how they were met. And so general stakeholder outreach is very good for state freight plans. We're very pleased with that. And we're pleased with the new provisions for additional membership on state freight advisory committees. I will note, though, that domestic maritime shipping and America's Marine Highway Program, those are kind of low on the list. And those, like I said, those marine highway programs are very near and dear to our hearts at MARAD. Specifically inland waterway and coastwise commerce. And we are looking for any opportunities that you may be able to bring us to get the word out and come up with new projects and expand the utilization of our domestic waterways and marine corridors. So thanks. Next slide. So getting near the end here. So MARAD research activities, we have several going on right now. We have a waterfront asset management tool that's for in-water structures, but I think it could probably be applied to other infrastructure. Phase 1 is complete, but what we got out of phase 1 was basically a spreadsheet tool. But you can see from the graphic on the right, we do have a web-based tool that's also under development. We've done some preliminary work on that. We're hoping to issue a contract very soon to implement that. But it's for like I said, it's for in-water structures, but I think there's applicability to other asset management or infrastructure asset management. And most states and most of our grantees have asset management plans in place, but not all do. And there was a requirement, I think it was 2019 build grants required that if you got a port grant, that you had to have a waterfront asset management tool. And some of the ports did not. So that's why we developed that, but we will be making that available a lot. We also have a Transmap data hub. We're working with the University of Arkansas Marine Transportation Research Center on that. It's basically a large scale data hub, kind of, one of these Internet of Things, cloud-based, apps with the visualization tools relating to transportation infrastructure systems, et cetera, et cetera. As you can guess, that is a huge project. And I think as we hear talk about other types of this concept and this was from an authorization and appropriation directly from Congress a couple of years ago. But since then, we've had this is before the supply chain disruption. So now after the supply chain disruption, I think there's been a renewed focus on this. So we're seeing lots and lots of different, kind of ways to, how to get the right data, how to use that data, and how to use that data to apply some solutions. Also, the Intelligent Transportation System Joint Program Office, we are working with them on data with other agencies as well and ports around the nation to data standards, consistent data standards for port community systems, operating systems around ports to manage cargo flows. And then also we've done some port automation technology research, again, with automation. The point we want to make is that, it's not about replacing people. It's about making jobs better, making lives better, making freight flows smoother, improving efficiency in operations. And then domestic preference support, we have an ongoing cooperative agreement with the American Association of Port Authorities. And we are planning to do some sort of outreach with the ports around the nation about their issues that they've run into in the past with grants, with domestic preference requirements, and that may play well into the Made in America office at OMB as well. So next slide. And that's about it. I do want to put in a plug for our gateway offices around the nation. We have a new Pacific Northwest Gateway office, and we will also have a new St. Louis Gateway Director in the very near future. So those are coming up, but the gateway offices are generally the point of contact for your stakeholders when they have questions about ports and maritime activities. And that's available on our website. And then the next couple of slides, you can just kind of page through them. They are our Port Planning Investment Toolkit. This is available online. We can make hard copies available. Committee on Marine Transportation System also has a handbook for port and waterway and maritime funding opportunities. It's a great resource. It's very, very kind of kept quiet. So I encourage you all to check that out and share that with your maritime stakeholders. And then the next slide is the routes program at the U.S. Department of Transportation Office of the Secretary, rural. So the routes toolkit, you can go to the next slide. The routes toolkit has a matrix discussing funding programs at USDOT as they apply to rural areas. So that's all I had. And thank you for your time. I appreciate being here. Yeah, some more links here at the back. So anyway, just trying to get the information out there, and I'd be happy to talk to anybody if you have any questions or anything like that. So thank you.
Yep, thank you very much, Wade. There's one question online, but I want to find out if anybody in the room has a question for Wade before we go to the online one.
There's one.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Wade, for that excellent presentation. I look forward to hearing it again at the Water Council later. I find that in Michigan, one of the challenges that the ports have is coming up with that match to be able to apply to some of the MARAD programs. And you mentioned that there are some programs that you can use a federal grant to match another federal grant. And I'm not familiar with that. Which programs?
I'm sorry. It's the large programs, the ones that were under the combined NOFO. I think the rural, I think, does that. And I think it may be maybe infra this year. They may have revised infra to allow some sort of provision for the use of other federal funds toward that. Unfortunately, not our MARAD grant. The Port Infrastructure Development Program and Marine Highway Program do not offer that currently, anyway.
Thank you.
The way the question online is, can the speaker restate the 30% apportionment on slide 7? And
yeah, you probably don't need to go to the slide. So that was in the bipartisan infrastructure legislation. It was a revision previously. States could use 10% of their National Highway Freight Program funds for I think it's an intermodal rail, freight rails, or freight and intermodal rail projects. So there was an interpretation made on that, I believe, and that there you go, that bullet kind of in the middle there, that ports do fall under that if they're as freight intermodal hubs. So, and we have seen a few states take advantage of their National Highway Freight Program, apportionment for freight related projects at ports or accessing ports. So, but that has increased from 10% of your apportionment to 30%. That's the allowable. Of course, you don't have to do it. Hope that answers the question.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. I don't see any other questions online. Caroline?
All right, thanks Wade, and thanks everyone for the federal partners update. So we're gonna move into our guest presentations portion. And Ryan, I will stop sharing my screen, so I believe you can share your presentation.
Thanks, Carolyn. So my name's Darren Timothy. I'm the chief economist here at DOT. Ryan Endorf, also in my office. We're going to be talking today about our recent one-year supply chain assessment on the freight and logistics sector. Ryan and I also wear several other hats here at DOT. We're happy to dovetailing on our DOT colleagues' presentations. If you have questions about that, issues like Buy America or some of our grant programs or other freight policy issues, we're happy to address those as well. Want to go to the next slide. So Executive 14017 was issued by President Biden back in February 2021 and directed an all-government approach to assessing vulnerabilities and strengthening the resilience of critical supply chains in the U.S. So initially, there were 4 reports required within 100 days on specific critical products. You can see those listed here, including semiconductors, batteries, critical minerals, and pharmaceuticals, all of which were issued in June of 2021. The executive order also required 6 sectoral assessments. Over to the next slide. But within 1 year, such as why we refer to it as our 1-year report, on different aspects of the nation's industrial base. And one of those reports on the transportation industrial base was assigned specifically to the Department of Transportation. As we thought about what would be the best contribution we could make, we ultimately landed on decided to, rather than the other, unlike the other reports which focus specifically on industrial production, we felt would make most sense in thinking about supply chains for us to focus on the freight and logistics sector. Ryan, you want to talk through?
Sure. I think the president established a supply chain disruptions task force in June of 2021. And at the time, I think rising congestion at our ports and across the supply chains within the country and rising prices really highlighted and drove home the need for considering how we can improve resiliency within this sector. We know that it's a complex problem to solve. It's not just in the public sector. The private sector ultimately is making most of the decisions in terms of their operations. But there is a role for the public sector to play, certainly infrastructure funding, on highways, at ports, and occasionally some of the short line railroads. Certainly data needs, I think, is something that we've wrestled with at the department for the last several years, but it's really been an issue that we found in the midst of the pandemic. Many companies, or operators across the supply chain, not necessarily having good information about where their shipments are. That was certainly a complaint that many retailers had. So there's certainly a public role to play in addressing these issues, and the administration has taken a very active role, I think, in this space over the last couple of years. We issued an RFI in mid-September that lasted for about I think it was 45 days, and received a number of comments from many of you as well, and we appreciate that. A lot of comments from private individuals, mostly it looked like existing truck drivers, a lot of comments on existing trucking regulations, as well as workforce challenges that we've been seeing across the space.
So within the one-year report, it was structured basically in two parts. One, where we talk about some of our key findings on the current state of the freight logistics system and potential vulnerabilities in that system. And then we have a number of policy recommendations. So I'll talk first about some of those key findings you see listed here. We discussed how underinvestment across all aspects of the freight logistics sector has made the system more vulnerable to disruptions. Certainly the current pandemic has exposed the lack of resiliency in certain areas. But a lot of those vulnerabilities could be subject to other types of disruptions, such as related to climate change, extreme weather events, or terrorism or cyber attacks. We've seen consumption patterns change in response to the pandemic, particularly as reflected in a surge in the demand for consumer goods, which has really been a big part of the story, straining our supply chains. That's been paired with the rapid growth in e-commerce, which has in turn increased the demand for warehousing space, leading to some of the lowest vacancy rates we've seen for warehousing this decade, and really constraining availability in markets where that demand is greatest. Data visibility was another theme that arose in the comments we received. Lacking a lack of real-time data on freight and logistics movements, and also noting that data sharing among freight sector participants is relatively limited. We discussed labor shortages. Those are been prevalent across the whole economy, and especially particularly acute within the transportation sector. And find that many freight industry employers are finding it increasingly difficult to recruit and retain qualified employees. And finally, recent shortages of available chassis and containers have reduced efficiency of the system and have affected, importantly, the ability of U.S. exporters to access global markets, as we've seen the phenomenon of exporting air as empty containers are quickly returned to Southeast Asia in order to be refilled with high-value consumer goods, rather than being made available, particularly for agricultural exporters for the backhaul movements. So these are some of the stresses that we addressed. Next, Ryan's going to talk about some of our key policy recommendations.
So our report has 62 total policy recommendations, and I think it's important that, at the outset, our view here was kind of more of a medium-term, long-term view. Certainly the short-term matters as well. That's a lot of what the Supply Chain Disruptions Task Force has been doing. They've issued a port action plan. They've issued a trucking action plan. The port action plan was in November. The trucking action plan was issued in December, and they actually just did an update of that trucking action plan in April. So their work continues. The Flow Initiative, which I think some of you will hear from our colleague Andrew Peterson on at the Waterways Council meeting this afternoon. So our view was certainly a bit more of a longer term outlook. And we divided our recommendations into these 5 broad categories with kind of some of the specific policy goals within each. So infrastructure investment, obviously the passage of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law provides a significant amount of investment along with the recent appropriations. And many of the programs there have specific supply chain nexuses. Certainly the Port Infrastructure Grant Program, the expansion of infra, as well as the mega project program and the rural program as well. All of those certainly will benefit freight throughout the country. From a planning, the next category would be planning and technical assistance. Certainly we are working on state freight plan guidance and hope to have that out in the next month or two. But I think also looking at strengthening the capacity of freight planning at all levels of the public sector. There's the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law creates a new freight office within the Secretary's office here at USDOT. We haven't stood that up just yet, but we expect that more announcements on that forthcoming throughout the year. And we think that that office will play an important role both with the state freight plans, but with also helping build capacity at the state and MPO and municipal level for creating state freight plans and interacting with folks involved in the space. Third main category is research and data. We think the federal government has an important role to play in terms of aggregating data, helping to identify new sources, bringing industry participants together to share data where possible. And certainly the Flow Initiative is a good example of something the administration is doing in the short term to help improve data sharing across the freight and logistics sector. Fourth, rules and regulations. Some of this touches on DOT, but I think this is an area where our recommendations are a bit broader than just DOT. Certainly the administration is strongly supportive of enacting bipartisan ocean shipping reform in whatever form that may take, providing the FMC with additional authorities to ensure fairness for our importers and exporters. I think there's looking at other regulations that can improve efficiency while still maintaining adequate safety levels is something that the administration will be thinking about. And then the final category is coordination and partnerships and using the pulpit of kind of the U.S. federal government to make sure that we're bringing together actors across the sector, working with our international partners, Canada, Mexico, as well as our friends in Europe and Asia, and making sure that all the different viewpoints across this space, whether it's labor or management or state, local, making sure that they're all part of this discussion. And we think that the state freight advisory committees that many of you have stood up are an important conduit for that. So we still strongly encourage you all to set those up. I'll go to the last slide here, a number of links, and we can provide this presentation to Caroline and she can distribute it. One thing I would say is that, we were one of 6 agencies to produce a 1-year assessment. And I would strongly encourage you to, if you have time, to look at some of the other ones. I think the one that USDA did on food and agriculture products, as well as Department of Energy's on energy, have strong links to a lot of the transportation work that we were doing, DOD's as well, on kind of defense movement and the defense industrial base. So would strongly suggest taking a look at those and some of the recommendations that they might have as well. And I think with that, we're happy to take any questions that you might have.
Yep, thank you, Ryan and Darren. Any questions for Ryan and Darren from the room? Okay, no questions. Yeah, I don't see anything online, but I do have a question for you, Ryan and Darren. Ryan, you talked about on the policy recommendations, you talked about research and data to improve supply chain planning. At the state level, that's one of our biggest challenges, is really everything is happening in real time. To be able to get real time supply chain data and do real time planning is really, really very challenging for us at the DOT level, and we're being asked these questions every day. You know, I'm going to, actually our Senate has asked us to go and testify on impact of supply chain disruptions. But in some instances, we don't have data to be able to actually answer some of those questions. So on that, really, you know, one, you getting that data real time, and then two is how, or my question is, will you share that with us at the state DOT level? Make that data available at some point for us to be able to use. And you mentioned something about consistency around the country. If all the state DOTs can have access to the same data, I think it will help instead of us trying to piece data together, piecemeal things, you know, from our different sources. So just, you know, loaded question, but hopefully you can shed some light on it.
Yeah, I think the Bureau of Transportation Statistics here at the department is looking carefully at some of the different topics that we can improve our data collection on. Certainly, they restarted the VIAS survey, the Vehicle Inventory and Use Survey, and that's a product that you know, will be coming out in the next couple of years. I think any questions about data, and especially as you try to get more real-time data, you know, there's certainly a time component to that. It's not something that we're likely going to be able to do overnight, but it's you know, that's one of the reasons I think putting this recommendation in here is to put it on the radar, especially in this moment where supply chains are top of mind for everybody around the country, and really to emphasize both to Congress in terms of authorities that we might need, as well as for Congress for funding to be able to support the development of these data programs. To work with some of our independent regulators like the Federal Maritime Commission and the Surface Transportation Board, who might have authorities to collect data from their respective entities that they regulate, and then working whole of government to combine what access to data we have and what can we put in the public sphere. But I do think that it's something that, you know, we recognize for your state freight plans. We want to have consistent data sources that you're all using, so that there's consistency in terms of how those plans are developed. So, you know, I think it's a longer term, a medium term, longer term goal to be able to access more data and to be able to provide that, not just, you know, for our use internally, but for your use as well.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a question here in the room. Doug, go ahead.
My question's for Ryan. Ryan, hi, this is Doug Briggs. Regarding the new elements to the state freight plans brought out by the BIL, with new guidance, are the states expected to meet those requirements with the ones that are developing their freight plans currently and in the near future?
Yeah, any state that has to update their state freight plan, you know, after following the passage of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law on November 15th of last year, all those new requirements apply. So, yes.
Thank you.
In the room or online? If not, thank you very much, Ryan and Darren. We appreciate you being here with us, and certainly we'll continue to look forward to a lot of things coming out of you know, you guys' office, and certainly you know, guidance on state freight plans. You know, there's a sense of urgency for a lot of us as we're developing freight plans, including Texas. But then again, on some of the supply chain issues and challenges we're all facing, you know, at the state DOT level, but also at the local level. So, you know, federal side really taking a lead role, and this is very, very important. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yes, thank you.
Yep. Caroline.
All right, thanks Ryan, thanks Darren for that great presentation. And now we are going to move to a presentation from Gino Kohler from Illinois DOT, and I believe he is in the room.
Yes, Gino is here. So Gino.
All right, great. I'm going to put the presentation up on the screen.
Yeah, you have to hold the button, Gino. So it's a kind of a interesting one.
Not a problem. I can hold it the whole time. We get the slides up. That'll be great. So I'm Gino Kaler. I'm from the Illinois Department of Transportation. I'm also the co-chair with Dave Huff on the Freight Operations Working Group, along with Pat Zielinski from AASHTO. So if you go to what we're going to discuss today, and I need everybody's attention, just kind of follow with this story, because at the end of this, there's going to be an ask. I'm going to be looking for a little support at the end of this, but I want to put you in a frame of mind of thinking about COVID the last couple of years. With that, let's go to the next slide. All right, so effective response to state and regional national emergencies, disasters demands a quick movement of relief of supplies and materials. So when something happens, us as DOTs, we get asked to help provide and try to get things to, the impacted area, and sometimes delivering it quickly requires additional weights on trucks and special items to get to the scenes to help clean these things up. As you see in the bottom paragraph, states may routinely issue overweight permits to vehicles carrying non-divisible loads, but overweight divisible loads may only be issued a permit if there's delivering relief supplies when the president declares a major emergency disaster under the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act. So that's the only time that we can carry additional weights with divisible loads. Next slide, please. So what are non-divisible loads and divisible loads? Non-divisible loads, for people in the room that are in construction, you're thinking big I-beam, something like that, big, huge objects that can't be broken down. Other things, if you're moving, if you're from an industrial state, you think of big pieces of equipment, dozers, trucks, farm equipment, things like that. And it takes more, anything that takes more than 8 hours to dismantle, they can actually ship in one piece. So that's part of the regulations. Also, you see if it destroys the value of a load or the vehicle, you're starting to think like big tanks, things like that. Those are non-divisible loads. But in the scenario that we had in the last few years, examples of a divisible load, medical supplies. We were talking respirators, ventilators, canned goods, believe it or not, livestock, hogs, cattle going to different freight yards, things like that. And they're all limited to the 80,000 pound max. So it became a problem, with this additional weight. Next slide, please. So the vehicle weight limitation, the current language basically has these 4 dot points that we have to comply with. And notwithstanding any other provision in this section, the state may issue a special permit during an emergency overweight, 2 overweight vehicles and loads that can easily be dismantled and divided if A, here we go, the president has declared the emergency to be a major disaster under the Stafford Act, or B, the permits are issued in accordance with state law. C, the permits are issued exclusively to vehicles and loads that are delivering relief supplies. And the 2 expiration down there, the permit is issued under the paragraph 1 shall expire not later than 120 days after the declaration of the emergency under the subparagraph. So what that means is, COVID, as we all know, it lasted forever. It went more than 120 days, and we're still seeing some problems with some of the delivery, some of these supplies. So got that in your mind there. Next slide, please. So the problems that we have when we're responding to these disasters and we're having these additional weights, we have to wait on the president's declaration to invoke the Stafford Act. The threshold of the Stafford Act declaration is that the response is beyond the capability of the state. So, everything's hit the fan. In other words, it's a bad scenario. Everything's hit the fan. We've got localized disasters might not trigger the Stafford Act because it's not beyond the capability of the state to respond. But there is still a need for these relief supplies. So in other words, if you have a regional, you have a flood, a tornado, disaster, as I have in the next slide or next dot there. If you have one of these regional disasters, sometimes the Stafford Act's not enacted. So to carry additional weights, your secretaries, your directors of your states are actually allowing this additional weight to run on state routes, not interstates. So my question in reality to all of you is, is that much quicker? If you're making these guys go through all these small little towns, how big of an emergency is it? You know, you're slowing the delivery down, and that's not a good thing. The other situation is a lot of on your primary roads, you have limitations on your structures and on your pavements. So they're not built quite to the capability of an interstate, but at the same time, we can't use them. It's not making a lot of sense. So next slide, please. So the solution is to revise this statute. The benefits, reduce the time needed to resupply and end the local emergency in a shorter time frame if doable. It'll simplify routes since governors can already increase the allowable weights on state and local roads. And it'll relieve confusion for the carriers which roads can be traveled. Oh my gosh, we had all kinds of issues all over the country with that. So we're going to talk about a couple of other things in a couple more slides regarding that. Next slide, please. So who's on board? We've been out talking about this and trying to develop things and talk about it to try to get acceptance. And that's this my ask for. Who's on board so far? We've got the American Association of State Transportation Officials, AASHTO. We've got CVSA on board, and you'll see a little here about how they are supporting us on another little project, but they're behind us. The American Trucking Association, we have talked with them about the additional weights. Rigging Association out of DC, they're on board with us. So some of the other groups we're talking to, Governors Association, NEMA, Governors Highway Safety, they're supporting us, but we're talking to them as well, trying to get an official statement from National Tank Truck Carriers Association, utility associations. You know, anytime there's a hurricane or a tornado, something like that, those utilities, those guys are always responding. The railroad companies, we've been talking, and the Red Cross. You know, when you're talking food supplies getting to these disasters, this change is absolutely needed to benefit. There we go. So other AASHTO committees being engaged, and we're asking for their supports. Committee on Transportation System Operations. These are some we've already talked to, some we still need to. You know, you see the Special Committee on Freight. We're speaking to you guys this morning. The Freight Planning Task Force, Committee on Bridges and Structures. You always want to have your bridge engineers involved anytime you're throwing additional weight out on the pavements. Committee on Transportation System Security and Resilience. And then also the County on Highways and Streets. So these are the people who are trying to get engaged, try to get buy-in to support this idea and try to get this language changed. Next slide, please. All right, so I've got to read this just to make sure that everybody understands where we are changing what. If anybody's going to take a picture of a slide, this would be the slide that you want. If you take a look, these are the actual things that we need to change, and we're talking with Susan from AASHTO to try to support us with this endeavor. You see the second line there, it says the president has declared an emergency. So we have to actually add that language, an emergency or a major disaster under the Robert T. Stafford Act. The next dot point's a whole new dot point. The governor of a state has declared an emergency in accordance with state law, or the Federal Highway Administration has declared that an emergency exists which justifies an exemption from the limits of this section. You see down there below C, it says number 2, expiration. A permit issued under paragraph 1 shall expire not later than 120 days after the date of the declaration under the subparagraph A of that paragraph. Talk a little bit about that. Caitlin Hughes, when we had the whole disaster going on with COVID, there's a specific rule that does not allow states just to give a general waiver. You actually have to issue a permit for that load. And some states have automation, some states don't have automation. And for like Illinois, I'll give you an example. We can design a specific permit within minutes, specifically for a disaster, for a specific product, for specific hours, start time, end time, as far as the daytime period. And not everybody has those capabilities to do that. This is kind of a new thing that some of the providers are actually designing up in their products. So it's something that we really we need and we want to comply with to make federal highways happy. So you put that, you actually have to have a permit with an extended time period on it. Number 3, the notification. The state shall notify the federal highway if the state intends to issue a special permit under this provision in an emergency. FHWA shall make the notice publicly available, which may include posting it online. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but this just kind of makes sense. If we have intention of using their interstates, we got to notify them. I mean, that's just common sense, be it the governor, be it the secretary or director of transportation, whoever it may be. Number 4, the extension, and this is what I was kind of referring to there. The state may extend the 120-day time period for special permits. This matches basically the same law that we're doing when it comes to the Stafford Act, but we want to do it on the state level. Does anybody have any questions on this particular slide before I move on? But that's all the nitty-gritty language it's going to need to be passed to support this endeavor. With that, next slide, please. That went easier than I expected, Patrick. Okay, our ask. We're here, we're asking for your support. We plan to have an AASHTO resolution from the CTSO to go to the board of directors. The specific language may change. What's everybody think? Do you support this concept? I'm looking around the room. I'm seeing open faces. Nobody wants to commit. Sure.
No, Gino, this is Caroline. Yeah, from, and a lot of calls we have discussed this, but for us in Texas, we're a big freight state, but also we get a lot of disasters and emergencies, from hurricanes to winter storms and others, that this really makes a lot of sense for us, but I cannot speak for Texas or TxDOT. That would be kind of above my pay grade, but this is really significant.
No, that I totally understand. We're out telling the story. We need to tell the story.
Yeah.
Before I started doing the trucking and the oversized overweights, I did emergency response and homeland security, and I had propane shortages to the north. I had droughts and hay shortages to the west, always had tornadoes and flood issues. We'd support the hurricanes down here with relief for some of the utility endeavors. And so, I entirely understand. I'm at that pay grade too. So I entirely understand, but I'm trying to sell this concept, try to get everybody's support.
Yeah.
Sure, go ahead.
Gino, from the military's perspective, we would support this because, disaster response, the military need to deploy equipment and forces as quickly as possible to seaports of embarkations. And we would definitely support something where the states could easily, allow us to move heavier stuff to the ports quicker. So something the military would.
And one thing, and I just recently had a question from the military, so it's kind of on my mind. They sometimes don't remember that we try to protect our bridges and structures. You guys got some heavy stuff, I'm telling you. And I understand that when you start talking security of the country, hey, go out there and knock yourself out and go forth and succeed. But if it's a regular movement, we need to route you a certain way so you don't bust up and crunch our structures.
Yeah, I totally agree. We're the military, we're not out here to break the infrastructure, but we recognize that there's, some stuff that may be slightly over the weight limits that could easily make its way to the port without causing significant impacts.
I think that's where the automation and the permitting comes in, and now the permitting so quick that it's really beneficial for your particular operation. Had a question over here.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm Susan Binder with Cambridge Systematics, but in a prior life, I have spent more energy on truck size and weight than I'd care to admit. In any case, what is the definition that you think you would use for an emergency I mean, you have to change a statute if you want to do this, but I would presume there would be some regulatory activity or whatever, because there are emergencies that are of short duration. There are emergencies that are chronic, way beyond, you know, a COVID or a pandemic period.
Yeah.
And let's face it, there's been some bad behavior in terms of strategic definitions, even of divisible loads over time that have
Oh, I've got one in my head right now that you're talking about.
Yeah, in the legislative arena, I've been in many of those battles. So how would you think that you would either prepare a definition of emergency so it would get at the national interest, the state interest that you're talking about, or would you just defer that to a next step?
I think I'm going to turn around and take a look at Patrick. I think it's something we would discuss as a team and come up with a final solution. I can appreciate some of your roles. I have been beat up with legislation in the state, and I think you'll hear that just about from every state, you know, where legislation is passed for a special permit for a special entity, a special interest. And then, you know, those weights have been, you know, abused. You know, on our structure. So I know those are out there as well. Patrick, do you want to join in here?
Oh yeah, we haven't considered that yet, but these are exactly the types of questions we need to hear, we need to consider. So thank you for that. And anybody else, please chime in with things like this. I mean, one of the problems is the major disasters under the Stafford Act is so restrictive. We need a way to expand it because there's problems that states experience that don't fall within that. You know, a pipeline cybersecurity hack caused problems all up and down the East Coast. Near me, gas stations were running out of gas. That is not covered under the Stafford Act, but there was a need to move fuel.
What about, this is Leslie from Indiana. I know during our COVID days, we extended an emergency permit, and every company defined what a relief supply was differently. To each company, removing trash was a relief supply in their eyes. Are we going to go any further to divulge what would be covered, or are we leaving it at delivering relief supplies? Or, you know, I guess that's a broad term, and in different people's work situations or supply situations could be different.
Great question, Leslie. And you know the Chicagoland area as well as I do when it comes to garbage disposal, obviously. But that's a good point. And we're going to, in a couple more slides, I'm going to address some of the things that CVSA has done and kind of approach it. So hold on to that thought for a couple more slides, and we'll discuss that here in a moment. Anything else on this slide?
This is Dan McElhenney, Idaho. The more we can deregulate and empower the states, I mean, we've seen a lot of improvement on that, particularly in Idaho. It really helps us during these emergencies. So we like the suggested change.
Preliminary feedback that I like Susan Binder's comment about the word emergency, because on first blush that looks pretty good. It looks like it relates to what's called an emergency declaration, which is the counterpart to a major disaster declaration, and it's what we used to find eligible. It's pretty broad. It's much more than natural disasters, but I think that could also be a little vague and might encompass things like the other types of emergency declarations the president makes. For example, like there's one specific to forest fires. So, you know, I think that one might need a little bit more clarification, but it's certainly a good start. The thing that I see that is possibly a big lift is you have 3 types of entities qualified to call a declaration here. One is the president, which is consistent with current law. One is the governor, and one is federal highway. Having federal highway declare an emergency would be new, but it would be kind of a parallel to what FMCSA does for hours of service issues. Having the governor declare an emergency on her or his own would be, I guess there are still opportunities, like 30-day opportunities for states to have hours of service authority until FMCSA takes over and decides whether that's valid. But when it comes to the infrastructure, because the special permits authority extends to all of the states from which relief supplies could be coming to the emergency, I think that having vesting one governor with the authority to declare an emergency might be a bit of an overreach on this if it weren't in partnership with federal highway. So I think you still might want to look at a federal role in this and not immediately punt it, because there are ways that this could go awry. So that's just a caution to maybe consider, instead of an or, something like an and, or and then
maybe with the division's approval.
Well, it's still, the thing I'm getting at is that what happens when a declaration is made like this is it has national impacts. So I don't even know if a division administrator is, the right level for which a national level not waiver, permit of heavier trucks is appropriate. So I think I'm going to repeat what I said. I'm not speaking right now on behalf of Federal Highway's position on this, because we haven't talked about this at the appropriate levels, but I'm giving you my sort of a perspective of how I could see this playing out, where there might be some problems in implementing it. So, again, I think probably bringing it up higher into the federal highway is maybe a better proposal, but again, can't say that this is authorized by anyone back at my office. And then the last thing here is that there's a 120-day extension of this that you leave in the hands of the state. So, I think extensions make a lot of sense in certain cases, like an extension for, certainly when we had Hurricane Katrina, there was a lot of need for debris removal, which is trash, but it is also specifically authorized in statute. So, 120-day extension makes sense. However, I think because some emergencies might be shorter in duration, like ice storms, and you might not need quite that length. Again, that might be something where instead of the state offering the extension, maybe that is a federal determination. I will say I super love Gino and others for working on this, because we see the errors often. We see when states go ahead and they just they go ahead and they issue the authority for permits on the interstate without there being a valid declaration by the president, or worse, they waive weights on the interstate, and that we never want to waive weights. Waiving is something that puts your infrastructure in a perilous safety stance. So you really need to remember that the permit is the tool by which you can control what kinds of things are allowed. I mean, where FMCSA does identify the loads that are eligible for hours of service waivers, FHWA does not do that in terms of designating what kinds of goods should be allowed under permits for emergencies. So, I think that flexibility is useful, but you could, I think you get to approve the permits. So if you think that taking out regular household trash is not an emergency, as opposed to like removing debris from a national emergency. You can choose not to issue the permit. It's an authority that is granted to the states, and how you implement it after that authority is validly granted is up to you. So in any case, those are my 2 cents, my personal 2 cents. I think my boss may have left the room, but I just want to clarify that yes, we think that there's been a lot of confusion about the Stafford Act. Yes, there seems to be a need to improve on it and provide more efficiency, certainly, because this is not an efficient process to wait for a presidential major disaster declaration, and some more flexibility, because the narrowness of the major disaster declaration is really insufficient for things like cyber attacks, fuel shortages, pandemics, other health emergencies, public health emergency. It's just, it doesn't cover anything except natural disasters. So thank you for working on this, and I do appreciate that there are folks who want to support this.
Caitlin, I'm sure this isn't the last time that we're going to discuss this. Go ahead, Patrick.
So first of all, just for your knowledge, Martin Knopp is still in the room. There was some laughter here.
I may not have a job when I get back.
So thank you for sharing the not official FHWA, just your personal comments. But at some point, FHWA would be solicited for comments. Do you mind just explaining to folks how that process would work, of when that would happen?
Yeah, we don't actually do that. The way that works is if a member of Congress proposed some legislation and sought FHWA's technical assistance, then it comes to the agency for vetting, and the vetting is not a policy vetting. The vetting is, can this be implemented? Is this technically capable of being implemented? So that's where we might point out that just the word emergency might be a little too vague. Like, do they want to go? And we wouldn't say do this. We would say, if you're striving to be broad, you can do this. If you want to be narrow, then you should point here. But we're not going to pick one and tell them which we think is better. We don't take a policy position on technical assistance.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Any other comments from the room?
Does Martin look happy? Or
he's wearing a mask.
You're in
I can't
trouble.
tell.
Caitlin, you're in trouble. Uh-oh, here he
has a
comes.
mask on.
Uh-oh.
Caitlin,
Press and
even if
hold.
the light's on?
Yeah.
Oh. Caitlin, can I see you outside in the hallway? Now, I am going to move to another meeting, but I think Caitlin did well to describe some of the thought processes. There's nothing that she said that I have concerns with. And Gino has heard me before kind of mention that one thing that, as Caitlin pointed out, too often we see errors by states in issuing, and it's not necessarily state DOT. Gino mentioned the emergency management agencies, and they have less understanding about kind of the process and the transportation laws here. So, but it's just part of where we see a lot of states that will issue waivers or other errors. And I think it's incumbent, it'd be to your benefit as Federal Highways, we're not taking a stance for or against what you're doing. We're trying to help with relay technical assistance, but I think it would do yourselves a world of good to show that you have processes in place that can accurately manage the current program, especially when you're asking for perhaps some delegation of capabilities to make it easier. So Gino has been a good model with a lot of the changes he's put in. I think the door is big enough. He can still get his head out through the door, but I think he is a good resource for you to probably tap, who's had discussions with us quite a bit over the last couple of years in this area, but kudos.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Martin, for those. Yeah, that's a question right there. Go ahead.
Yeah, Gino, this is Elisha Wolf from Michigan DOT, and I'd like to defer to our permits area for a formal position on this, but I recognize that some of them are on the committees you've spoken to, so I'm sure they're really well versed on this. And I just wanted to offer, my boss actually has left the room, but conceptually, from a freight planning perspective, I support the concept and appreciate you sharing.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And I know your permit office will probably be on the call in like the next section here after we go to break. I think they come on around 11. So, and they've heard me tell this dog and pony in like the MASTO meetings, because I'm MASTO co-chair as well with Iowa. So concerns, what are they? Do we know of other groups? I think we've kind of addressed some of those. We talked about emergency managers. We've got a little list. If you come up with any other ideas, let Patrick or myself or Dave Huff know out in South Dakota. How about the next slide, please? Okay, so as Caitlin was kind of talking about, and as Patrick here sits next to me, this is kind of the timeline of us moving forward of what needs to happen to get this legislation and this language changed. So we've got some dates on the left-hand side, got some dates on the right-hand side, and we're going to have to basically work on both sides of these timelines for this to actually happen. I think you heard Susan speak earlier from AASHTO about, this is an election year. A lot of things probably aren't going to happen this year addressing an issue like this. They've got re-elections and things that they're going to focus on. So I really don't expect a whole lot to happen this year, but this is our proposed timeline of how we kind of see things coming together. Anything else on that, Patrick?
Oh, I guess the main things are, next year is when we would hope to get congressional support after the new congressmen are sworn in. And AASHTO wide, are you going to cover that? Or?
On the next one.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so AASHTO wide, we're sorry, can you back up? Okay, here we go. So AASHTO wide, we're trying to hit up all the various AASHTO committees for input. We'll regroup in the summer with our task force of all the different associations to revise the language. And then at the AASHTO annual meeting in the fall, that's when we're going to look to present this to the Transportation Policy Forum and the Board of Directors for final approval.
Thank you, sir. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so during COVID, we're going to change topics here a hair, but still pretty much the same subject. During COVID, we had different states with different weights. It was crazy. These truckers, they couldn't cross state borders without being threatened to ticket on the other side of the border. And one thing that Director Scott Marler and Secretary Omar Osman, the Iowa and Illinois guys, they came to me and said, Gino, you need to fix this. And it's like, oh, that's a big statement there. It's like, okay, let me see what I can do. So as you see up there on the left-hand side, it talks about the memorandum understanding. And we did that in the Midwest. We've got buy-in from all 10 states. And we came across and came up with an agreeable weight, which was 80,000 or 10% per axle. That was not an easy task to do. Just coordinating it and trying to get the discussions. That was a challenge in itself. You definitely have to include and get buy-in from your bridge offices. You cannot ignore those guys, down the hall. You got to get them active and involved with this. That's part of the buy-in, but the whole goal is to do this nationwide. MASTO has done it. You can see over on the right-hand side, the WASHTO, the Western states are doing it, and NASTO and SASHTO are both at least talked about it at one of the conferences. I don't know really how far along they are. That's kind of out of my control, but if you were in the room and you're part of those states, this is a national effort. We want harmonization of these borders so that when it hits the fan, you know what I'm talking about, that these truckers can move from one state to another and not have any problem with those divisible loads. Any questions on this slide? If you need a example of that, reach out to me. I'll give you a copy of the MOU, take it to your region and run with it. You had a question over here?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, and appreciate what you did in Masto, us, that we ended up getting this agreement because, the early days of COVID, harmonizing those hours of service and the OSOW permits were, Secretary Osmond and I think were on the phone every single day there for a while, as was with Iowa and some others. So, I think that really was sort of the impetus where we wanted to avoid that happening again. So I think it's really been a beneficial process to go through.
Well, thank you. When Omer tells me to do something, I jump. With that, we'll talk a little bit more about that, I think, on the next slide. If you go to the next slide, we'll talk about some of the other endeavors going on. So you see the top here, it says emergency declaration website for oversized overweight vehicle permits, developing a partnership with CVSA, AASHTO, and FHWA, an intended central location for all emergency declarations. So when the COVID response was happening, wow, that's all I can tell you. Everybody and their brother wanted to know what was the leniency of the day. And I mean, I was getting 5-6 calls a day of where this information goes, and everybody was trying to maintain their own website. FHWA, AASHTO, CVSA, everybody was trying to do one. Midwest Trucker Association, ATA, ITA. I had them all asking me, says, what's the latest ruling from the governor this week or from the feds this week? And it's like, and it was a hodgepodge. You cannot go to one location and get all the information you needed. It was terrible, and it was a cluster. We have talked, the freight operations working group, we came up with this idea, says we need one site somewhere to try to solve this. And so we have hashed it around a little bit, and CVSA actually stepped up and said, we'll do it. So that's a good response. So with that, they are developing a map. It's should be totally complete. I think they said what, end of June. Beginning of June. I couldn't remember if it was beginning or end of June, but it will actually break down everything on that map. You pull up your state, this is the latest hours of service. This is the latest weight limitations. This is the latest item of whatever it is, and they'll list it on that website. So it's coming together and it looks pretty good. With that, next slide. Oh, she's gone. There we go. So questions. These are the three guys that's trying to pull this together. It's Patrick, myself, and the excellent Dave Huff from South Dakota. We all talk almost weekly about trying to get these things to come together. There's our email addresses. If anybody needs a phone number, let me know. Catch them in the hallway. But we are trying to promote this. We're trying to bring the nation together and harmonize a lot of different topics. Any questions from the room or from the web? Sure.
Yeah, Gino, the question, I know you talked about having support or trying to get support from a lot of entities. Have you also considered emergency management entities like FEMA? And I know at the state level, we have those organizations as well, because they're trying to help with response to manage these emergencies. And sometimes they run into the same issues as well. FEMA and Red Cross and all of these other entities trying to mobilize to get supplies either to or from whatever, but they run into the same thing because now the truck is like, okay, I can't because of hours of service. So I think also looking at, I want to lump them into kind of almost third parties that help with relief efforts. I think they could be a really great support for something like this.
Very good point on, including the emergency managers. I know at least in Illinois, I walk about 15 feet and I'm there. And that used to be my office. So I'm very passionate about emergency response, but that's something that we will definitely include, and we'll remember it to reach out to FEMA and also all the state individual emergency management agencies.
But as I mentioned to other big entities like Red Cross and others that generally respond to recovery, et.cetera. I think that could be really great allies if you guys are looking for support at the federal level, because they're across the board, so look at some of those entities that are lower across the board that they're responding to this disaster and recovery efforts throughout the country.
I think you bring up a very good idea. Maybe speak in front of like the state emergency operations centers, which all the players are in the room. You got Red Cross, you got your correctional officers, you've got ISP, you've got public health, you've got all your agencies there. So that'd be a good place to sell the idea as well. Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, so Red Cross is on our list of people to contact, just haven't gotten to them yet. Same with the National Emergency Management Association. They're on our list too, just haven't contacted them yet. We've spoken to the state DOT emergency managers, but haven't reached out to the state folks yet, and haven't thought to contact FEMA, but that's a great suggestion.
And also counties, local levels, they also have a lot of emergency management. So, you're looking at elected officials, the mayors, the county judges. Like I remember when Harvey happened, one of the county judges was chair of our freight advisory committee. He couldn't come because of Harvey. He had to stay put. He probably was on call for 2 weeks and literally didn't go home. So I think looking at some of those at the local level is also important because they're having to deal with this on a very real level. And they're responding to, constituents that are wanting things done at that level. Yes, Susan.
Can I echo that, but from a different spin? We talk to ourselves as transportation providers. Even if we're getting out into the emergency situation realm, we, poke our head out a little bit. To have that conversation, because we will run into roadblocks, is to tell the stories of people who were impacted negatively. So, we've got no shortage, unfortunately, of bad situations where this came in. And to have someone is more in the user community to say, hey, I was impacted this way, and therefore my community was impacted this way, because there is there's a balance here, of safety impacts, community impacts. So you need to tell the other side of the story, and that will be more compelling, I think, than telling it. They don't care what the DOT, I'm being very cavalier here, but the inconvenience at the DOT, or even at the provider level, pales in comparison.
You're
The
right.
human
Well,
element is very important. So, yeah.
You're right. The buzzwords are life, health, safety in this, and that's something we need to remember and push and emphasize. And long time with some of the consultants, life, health, safety. That's what it was.
Yep.
So Ron Pate here, Washington State. I think you're doing really good stuff. I like the concept. I'd have to definitely talk to my boss, Roger. And I know he's on the policy forum. One of the things I was thinking about is we have an emergency operations center that we work with folks all across the state. We have a very dynamic environment there, from avalanches to snowstorms, and we're expecting what they call Cascadia rising tsunamis, and they're always doing planning exercises for that. And I think some of the gaps they've identified with getting supplies to people in emergencies probably fits with your stuff. So if you can send that to me, I can certainly get it to that group. We work with Department of the Military, which is under the governor's authority in Washington State. And there's things they're looking at right now that I think align with that. So if you can just send me that, I can get it through. We can take a look at it. Yeah, the MOU, and then your information here, I think, about the law change, because they would be interested in that. They might be of the same opinion. Yeah, in certain areas, the governor needs authority, right? If half of our coast is gone and Seattle's got water going up the side, somebody needs to do something right away. And we've worked with special permits with FHWA. And I'll say on a short-term thing, not related to delivery of supplies or whatever, but when we had that locomotive on the freeway, that thing was 300,000 pounds, 1,300 gallons of fuel in it. I was on the phone with Department of the Military to move the stuff to JBLM and FHWA, and they were up at 11 o'clock at night wanting our engineers information to move that thing across bridges to get in JBLM. So they're willing to work with you, and they put the time in to get it done. So I think there's a process that can be documented. So
Yeah, so we gave these slides to AASHTO Caroline, and we can be sure she gets the MOU as well. I know there was a sign-in sheet going around.
Yeah.
So I think she's going to send it to everybody.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Yeah, to send it to everybody, Patrick. So. Any other questions in the room or online for Gino and Patrick on this? I don't online. So I think Gino and Patrick, we are good. And certainly, like you mentioned, Gino, this is a discussion to be continued. And if I can facilitate this in Texas, let me know. You know, at least get to hopefully the right folks, so people that can get to the right folks on this, because as I mentioned, Texas, we have quite a few emergencies and quite a few issues, especially hurricane seasons. We have wildfires, you name it, we have them. So anything that can facilitate, I think really your message has to be, how can we facilitate recovery in the event that we have all of these emergencies and disasters? Because sometimes if we have all of this regulatory impediments that now impedes us being able to respond, then that's a challenge. AASHTO Caroline, I think we're ready for a break.
Great, sounds good.
Yeah.
I'll just be sitting here, so you let me know when you guys are ready to restart.
Okay. Yeah, want to refill on coffee and other good stuff. You guys are missing what's it, vignettes or whatever. I already had two here.
Oh no, don't tell me that.
Yes, so we're going to indulge in it. I will be back. So take care, everybody online.
So welcome back, everyone. This next part of our agenda will go into some hot topics and state DOT updates. So this is the time for our members to share any hot topics that they'd like to talk to the committee about, but also for members to provide any updates from their programs, whether that be program overviews, current or upcoming projects, best practices, challenges, things like that. So I'll give it to the room. We'll start in the room and then go to those online. And if you're online and you'd like to share an update for your state, just write your name in the chat box, and then I'll let you know when you're next, so that way people don't all speak at once. So with that, I'll pass it back to those who are live in the room to kick it off.
Yep, anybody in the room that would like to share what they're doing? I know Ron is here from WASHDOT. Go ahead, Ron.
Sure, Ron Pate, Washington State Department of Transportation. I think we've talked about most of the things we're looking at. You know, we are doing our freight plan. We are working very hard to get that done with a lot of our partners. We've done a lot of public outreach already on that. The supply chain, like everyone else, we are very concerned about the supply chain, ports, containers, chassis availability. We've even, my boss, Secretary Millar, was at a restaurant in Seattle. And turns out the owner of the restaurant that gets food from like Thailand and the Middle East, they have a big issue of getting their supplies, and it'll take 3 months to get a container now. And every day that container's stored, they're getting charged like $300 a day. So we've met with Homeland Security, Department of Agriculture, trying to figure out if there's ways that the inspection processes can happen differently. Can the trucks get there in time? How can we make sure things are prioritized? And what we see happening is the small guys, this is a company that's got like 20 employees, but they move a lot of food into the Seattle market and on the West Coast. Their costs have went up 680% just for transportation. If they can't get any relief by July, they're out of business. And they have, their management staff has actually stopped paying salaries. So it's tragic, but it's really a bad thing. And it's not just happening to us. This is just one example, but Roger was eating and said, hey, can you follow up with these guys? And we have a freight mobility board that we work with, and some of the members on the board are ex-marine vendors for the marine cargo markets that I've enlisted their help to like work with folks and give them ideas on how they can move their products differently. Maybe they can jointly work with trucking companies to get piles of containers, right? Get their containers in piles, which are more easily accessible, and maybe get them inspected quicker. So we're trying to be helpful, but we don't really control that world. That's something that's going on. Truck parking is a huge issue in Washington State. You know, we've got trucks parking on the on-ramps and off-ramps of freeways. They do try to use rest areas. We're working with our rest area folks to see what can be done there. Access, I think Caitlin mentioned, direct access from the interstate, for private businesses like taking over a rest area. Not going to happen, but we do want to have some conversations about if a rest area would close off that interstate access, if maybe there could be a private public partnership. We're working with our folks in our private public partnerships to look at that. And the last thing I'll say is a lot of interest in Washington State in EV trucking, electric trucks, electric locomotives. BNSF I know has got prototypes. They I think have a locomotive down in California already running electric locomotives. Batteries versus hydrogen. We have clearly heard from our trucking industry batteries won't work. They don't carry the capacity to move loads for long distance trucks. They're worried about the weight in the trucks. We've went to Daimler, who's developing truck technology, automated trucks and battery technology trucks. It's the batteries charges, how long will they last? So latest I've heard, they're focusing on hydrogen. I know Toyota's got a lot of stuff going on with hydrogen vehicles, and trucking seems to be interested in that. And BNSF said they're also very much interested in that to try to find something that can be more sustainable and in their mind sustainable. We have a ferry fleet in Washington, and the ferries are going electric. And the thought is right now, by the power that's needed when you plug in those ferries, Seattle's lights will go dim while that thing's charging, right? So now you got locomotives and everything else. So there's a lot of need and thought on infrastructure, and especially when it comes to freight and moving heavy things. So I will stop there and pass it to my right.
Cheryl.
Thank you. I think it's still on. Yes. Missouri is, thankfully, we are completing our combined state freight and rail plan. The draft has been out for public comment. We're making those revisions now, and it will be going to our commission for final approval in June, and then be used for following up after that. The other thing that we have going on in our state, which has been very busy but very exciting, is our governor back in late November designated a supply chain task force, and he appointed it to be focused on infrastructure and workforce. The Director of Transportation, Director McKenna, and the Director of Workforce Development, Dr. Marnie Leathers, are the co-chairs for that. And then they have 5 private folks from around the state that were appointed by the governor on that. We are wrapping that up. It was a short term, and its draft report is also due the first week of June, and with final anticipated to be presented to the governor the end of June. But a lot of the issues we're talking about here have been part of that work that we're seeing presentations. We've been doing monthly regional meetings around our state and hearing presentations from industries and modal operators in the workforce. Something that has really come out in that has been not as much about our training per se, but the folks that are even trying to get into the training. The housing issue is really impacting them. We have locations that have jobs, but they are losing employees who they're trying to relocate there, or even refugee relocations to support some of the manufacturing that we have due to the non-availability of either rental or purchasing properties for them to live into. So our workforce development folks are doing some discussions with some of the larger manufacturers in those areas, and they are considering putting in some types of building a dormitories type activity close to them, or putting in there. Some of them are partnering with local developers to guarantee base rentals rates, some money to put that in place so that the employees, they can get the employees to work there. So we learned last week when we were in one of our locations, General Mills, who are supplying a lot of things, they are using trucks and chassis, much to our aghast, I would say, as warehouse storage on their back parking lot. They've got trucks and trucks full back there because they're having 2 and 3 month delays. So whenever they can get the products, they're getting it and they don't have room to store it inside their facility. So they're actually storing it in trailers and chassis on their back parking lot, taking it out for anybody else who wanted it. But we were talking about hoarding of supplies, and they said, we're one of the ones because we couldn't get supplies, and packaging is a huge issue right now. They're not being able to get the packaging to get their products out. So interesting report coming out, interesting topics for the past 6 months, and has been learning a lot. So our budget was passed in our state level Friday. It's on the governor's desk waiting for signature. The water and freight programs in the state of Missouri went from $12.5 million combined grant funds to $95 million as of Friday. I'm not entirely sure how we're going to administer those with myself and one other person. So we're get some resource issues going on there. Like some of the others have said, we have marine highway grants. And I do want to throw a plug out for everyone that this afternoon we at our Council of Water Transportation meeting, which will be held in this room as well. We're going to hear from the Maritime Commission, one of their commissioners, about a report on containers and chassis. So I think that will be a good discussion. I've read part of that report, and it really hits to the heart of things that we have been talking about in this committee and in water transportation for the past year.
Well, I can talk about rail issues, but is there anybody else from Ohio on the call before I talk?
Yeah, and just introduce yourself and then let people know where you're from.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, Matt Dietrich with the Ohio Rail Development Commission. Again, I can't give you the whole breadth of everything we're doing in freight. We do have a freight advisory council like everybody else for standing that up. Our freight plan is under review right now. I think from my, not speaking for the state, but from my personal perspective, I think one of the challenges with the freight plan is, you know, it is so close, the projects are so closely tied to the funding where, you know, from some of the historical planning, there's a little bit of separation, you know, I mean, you have the STIP and everything else, but now you have the freight plan, you know, it's almost like another STIP. And I'm a little fearful that that is going to be a continuing trend with the rail plan and some of the other plans that are necessary because, you know, as we're embarking on all this, we're talking about working with the private sector and what we're at a time when we need the maximum flexibility. It seems like our flexibility is becoming more and more diminished to respond to market needs. So that's just more of a, it's not a state of Ohio concern, but just, you know, as we're dealing with I think it's an overall concern. And I don't know if my colleagues in the other states share that concern as well.
I do.
That's why I gathered in all the conversations in the lobby, but I thought someone should say it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Gina?
Gino Kaler from Illinois DOT. I'm mostly on the heavy freight. We also have Bob Ennis on the line as well. Some of the things that we're doing in the permit office is kind of unique in the country. We just turned on the audible turn by turn for permitting. So stop and think, you know, you talk to Siri and say, hey, Siri, get me to the mall. Siri gives you directions. But when you start talking something 200 feet long, you just can't go to the mall with a 200-foot long object. So what we've added a barcode in the middle of the permit. You take a picture of it through, it's called Pro Miles Route Guidance, take a picture of it, and it turns the written directions that DOT has come up with, turns it into an audible direction system. So in the permitting world here, we are DOTs and we talk about reducing distracted driving, but we require a guy with a giant heavy object, 1 million pounds, to either read his iPhone or read a piece of paper while he's driving. That's how the industry is. That's how it works. So we have come up with a solution for that. So that's kind of neat. We've also come up with a little new technology. It's called Hawk Scan. Hawk Scan. So a truck comes into a scale. We have basically 5, I'm gonna call them cameras. I take pictures of the load. The first 1 and 2, they take a picture of the license plate and US DOT number and goes to the scale house, goes to FCMSC, see if they've been taken out in any of your states. If they're bad players in your state, I don't want them in Illinois to do that. So if they're good, they automatically kind of start thinking about giving them the green light instead of coming to a complete stop. permit loads are required to come to a complete stop at a scale. So the other 3 cameras put together a 4-dimensional image of this load, measures it to the 1/10 of an inch. And so the height, the width, and the length. So if you start seeing something at 14 feet, well, hey, you're supposed to have a permit. Well, I already got your US DOT number and your license plate number. Let's see if they got a permit. So if their permit is greater than their measurements, they get a green light. They don't have to stop. There's good things about this. You don't have a queue building back up on the main line. You don't have 2 officers out there doing an inspection. You're saving fuel and time by the driver and the hauler. So this encourages good behavior on completing your application correctly. During one of the demos, we actually discovered a load that was about 6 inches taller than what it was actually permitted for. And if it would have traveled another 3 miles, it would have struck a bridge. So this goes back to the reduce the bridge strikes, initiative. So that's a good thing we have going on as well. You heard us talk a little bit about the emergency divisible load earlier. I won't repeat on that, but we are not only in the Midwest, but through the National Freight Operations Working Group, we're also talking about harmonization of permits, permit application side. So every state, the permit application process would be the same, and what a permit actually looks like physically. So there are certain things that cops want to look at. There are certain things drivers want to look at, and there's certain data on those permits that the permitting offices need to comply with, some of the reports for federal highways. So we're looking at harmonizing that, and several of the Midwestern states are doing that. That's a lot in a nutshell. Very quickly, I'll give the rest of my time to Bob Enos from Illinois. Bob, are you on the line?
Yeah, I just want to mention we're in the process of updating our state freight plan. Currently, our current plan was 2017 is pretty high level. So what we're doing this time is we're doing not only our state freight plan, but we're doing all our districts. We'll have a freight plan. So that's 9 different districts within the state of Illinois will have their own freight plan. We're approximately 60% done. We're doing a lot of stakeholder community involvement, getting a lot of good feedback from that process. We wanted to take a deeper dive into the local and the district levels, the different challenges and opportunities for freight within Illinois, because each district is different, different opportunities, different challenges. So that process is going on. We're having a lot of good input in that. A couple other things, we recently completed a rail needs assessment in the process of doing updating our state rail plan. So those things are going on. And also we had a port capital program through our about $110 million through our Rebuild Illinois program, where we're looking forward to implementing those projects. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, state your name and your state.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. Paul Patnay with Arizona Department of Transportation. So the Arizona DOT update is we are, like many others, working on our freight plan as well, updating our current freight plan, looking to finish that up in September, fall, or early fall this year. Like mentioned earlier, truck parking is an issue across our state as well. They're parking along ramps, where pretty much wherever they can find a spot. So we're in the process of putting a study together to look at other areas. We're trying to expand parking in our rest areas, but we have limited capacity there as well. But a few more spots does make a difference. So then we also are looking at, we have a port of entry strategic initiative where we're looking at trying to focus on a lot of the intrastate truck travel. Looking at increasing our data collection as far as the amount and types of trucks. That way to see if we need to step up enforcement in any of those areas in intrastate. Then, like many others, we are having supply chain issues as well. Our construction materials are going up in cost, and we're trying just to manage the best we can on those issues. A big win for Arizona. The governor recently signed legislation, allocating $400 million of general fund money toward the Interstate 10 corridor right there between Phoenix and Tucson. So we'll be having a lot of activity going there because we're going to leverage that money to try to apply for a mega grant for that whole corridor, which 26 miles are left to expand. That's all. Thank you.
Good morning again. This is Elisha Wolf from Michigan DOT, and we have been quite busy, as all the other DOTs have, with freight. We completed our 2045 long-range transportation plan, which we fully integrated our state freight plan, state rail plan, active transportation plan into. So you can understand why I have a continuous intake of the coffee espresso here if you've attempted to do something of that nature. But it went quite well. That was approved in February, and we actually had to go through 3 different approval processes. So the long range plan was reviewed and approved, the state freight plan was reviewed and approved, and the rail plan was reviewed and approved. So those were on a little bit of a separate timeline, but overall they were all accepted. So that was positive. We are in a somewhat of an odd position now with the IIJA requiring state freight plans to be approved every 4 years. It was 5 years, and that was in alignment with the long range plan requirement. The rail requirement, of course, is different too, but FRA was flexible in allowing us to kind of be on the same timeline. So our desire would be that those requirements were the same, but they're not. So we're going to work with what we have. And our clock reset, we were one of 2 states that had our state freight plan approved twice under the FAST Act. So our clock is reset. We have 4 years now. So we're trying to determine how we're going to handle this update with the long range plan, if we just are going to update it all at the same time, do the freight plan updates or so forth. So, and also working on implementation of the plan. It was our hope from the start that it wouldn't be just a plan that sat on the shelf, but that we would be actively implementing it. So that's something we're working through. Our State Freight Advisory Committee, which is the Commission for Logistics and Supply Chain, is continuing to meet. They were meeting quarterly, but after the completion of the state freight plan, we opted to have that group meet twice a year. So they're actually meeting later this month, and we've got a large furniture company, Steelcase, that has offered to host that meeting and provide a tour for the Freight Advisory Committee members. So that's something we've been trying to do with that group, to just kind of make it a little bit more interesting and help them learn about some industries in the state, is taking them to those companies and doing tours and really forming that collaboration with private industry. So that's been positive. MDOT has also kicked off a new study to identify and outline potential benefits that could result from increased collaboration between Michigan and Ontario around technology solutions and innovations in the automotive and mobility sector. That study kicked off a few weeks ago, and we're looking forward to that joint collaboration with Ontario, and it's expected to wrap up in December of 2022. So like the other states, many other things going on with IIJA implementation, logistics issues, supply chain issues. So, but those are the big things for Michigan.
Awesome, thank you. Next.
Hi, Craig Thompson with the Wisconsin DOT, and our freight plan is due in December of this year, and I believe it's actually sitting on my desk right now to be, I'm the bottleneck at the moment, so to be reviewed, but I think we're in the final stages of that, and we'll be submitting that. Our Freight Advisory Committee continues to meet. It's been around now for about 6 years, and in addition to informing our freight plan, we also try to meet a couple times a year just to get more input from the industry and logistics in that. And one of the main themes that we keep hearing there is we no longer have intermodal in Wisconsin, and that's been a big, how do we get to that? The UP used to have one down at the Port of Milwaukee, but they got out of that several years ago. So looking at different areas where we think intermodal would be helpful in Wisconsin. One of the things we did get that was helpful in that regard is a new Midwest containerized grain export facility that we're starting out of the Port of Milwaukee, but overall intermodal has been a big issue for freight. As far as other things, just right now, really occupying a lot of our folks' time is with the federal money that just came in with the IIJA. We in Wisconsin, we have a law that if the federal money is going to be more than 5% greater than when our state budget was passed, or 5% less, that we need to submit a plan to our budget writing committee and how we're going to expend the different amounts. So we just did that and got it approved largely intact. But with the money not being appropriated until March, and the federal fiscal year ending September 30th, the sort of Herculean task for a lot of our people right now is to help. We're wanting to share a lot of the money with the locals, and they don't really have projects on the shelf. And so for them to get this through this process this quickly and get the dollars obligated is going to be a heavy lift. So that's a lot of what we're trying to do. The special bridge money, which actually has a longer horizon on that, we've got 4 years to obligate that. We're actually sharing 100% of that with the locals, because we have more posted bridges on our local system and causing more trouble there. So we've tried to direct as much money there as we can. And then I guess just finally, I would just say, building on some of when Gina was talking about MASTO with the harmonizing of some of the other things, we're with MASTO, we're still looking at some other freight cross-state freight corridor issues as well. So that's all I have. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you, Greg. Did we miss anybody, state DOT in the room? I'd like to give a quick update. Okay, if not, Caroline, AASHTO, I will turn it over to you to get folks online.
Okay, before I call a few of those online or those unmute their lines, I just wanted to provide an update from California. I don't think they're on the line. Let me just make sure. No. Okay, so this is updates from Yatman Kwan from California. Recently completed their Sustainable Freight Academy, which was attended by Caltrans staff, local and regional partners, and their neighboring states. Presenters included regional partners, other state agencies, other state and countries, Canada and France, and AASHTO presented as well. They are busy with the PDIP, Marine Highway, and MDGP NOFOs. They sent their scope of work for their freight resilience study, which they'll use as part of their freight plan update. California completed a state freight plan update in 2020 per state requirement, but we'll be updating it now for IIJA, hoping to hear back from the feds regarding the state freight plan guidelines. Also, they completed their truck parking study, and they can share the link with the group and the larger freight planning group when it's up on their website. And lastly, Caltrans freight team is expanding and they're hiring freight data and performance manager. So this position will help procure, evaluate, analyze, and utilize various freight data sources. If any other states have experience with this, they would love to pick your brain on it. So please contact Yatman Kwan if you have any questions or information. And with that, I will kick it to Maryland.
Hey everyone, this is John Thomas from Maryland DOT's Office of Planning and Capital Programming. We're going to join the crowd and say that MDOT Maryland DOT is finalizing our required updates to both our statewide freight plan and our separate statewide rail plan. We're getting close. We've worked with our stakeholders and our transportation business units and our state freight advisory committee to get to this point. Fortunately, timing wise, our updates will include the addition of the new plan elements put forth as part of IIJA. We intend to have our drafts posted for public review this spring. Once our internal reviews are completed, which are ongoing right now, and then we will send those off to Federal Highway and Federal Rail following. So with that, I'm going to introduce Ms. Lakeisha Markley from our Maryland State Highway Administration's Motor Carrier Division for a couple more updates.
Thank you, JT. Can you hear? I hope everyone can hear me. So, okay, perfect. So from the motor carrier office, we do have some permit updates similar to Illinois in that for our Maryland One permit system, we are rolling out app updates. And so one of the updates include a turn-by-turn direction enhancement. And this allows for the routing of the directions to include bridges, bridge restrictions. It's inline. It also includes the mile points. So now a person is able to understand, if they're on 95, they have 15 minutes to 695 or to the next route. It also provides bridge location information so that and crawl data so that the truckers are aware that a bridge will be coming up soon within their route. And this helps for newer drivers as well as for truckers that may not be familiar with the Maryland routes. We also have, for our blanket permits, we are starting route authorization on the permits, and that allows us to fully understand where the trucks are going, but also for a blanket permit, a lot of times people think that that's just, for one move. And actually a company will have that blanket permit available to them for up to 30 days. So that could be up to 50 moves or, however many moves they need to make within that time frame. So we didn't have that transparency in the past. And so that allows us to fully understand where our trucks are within the state of Maryland. We're also adding an escort queue. This will include police, district, and bridge escorts. That will include via routes, and that's in the past we've had where we've only provided begin and end points. Although it's given the truckers the quickest route, now the truckers will be able to customize their routes, and they'll be able to add middle points between those begin and end points. I also wanted to mention, as stated before by Glenn, we're also participating in the USC 23, the 23 USC 117 emergency declaration updates. And so we're pretty much following the AASHTO or the Midwestern states following their template. So I just wanted to mention that, and that's it for the Maryland updates. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Marilyn. Next up, we have Sherry with TxDOT.
Hi, good morning, good morning, everyone. This is Sherry Pfeiffer. I'm the Freight Systems Branch Manager for TxDOT. We're, just like most of you, working on our State Freight Mobility Plan, Texas Delivers 2050. And we're going to be submitting that to FHWA in early January for approval by March of 2023 to remain on schedule. A little bit that we're adding into this freight plan is we're going to do a supply chain network analysis of the top 5 commodities by industry. So we're looking at agriculture, construction, oil and gas, warehousing and distribution, and advanced manufacturing. And we're laying that information over our Texas Highway Freight Network to help us look at some of the choke points that we're seeing with some of those top industries in the state. And we have a supply chain working group comprised of private sector individuals representing those industries, so we can get the boots on the ground feedback to help us better inform not only the freight plan, but planning for how do we address these things in the future, because the supply chain problem isn't going to go away overnight. Something else we're doing is we're assessing 6 different case studies. We're looking at droughts in Texas, wildfires. We are looking at COVID-19, Winter Storm Uri that occurred in 2021, Hurricane Harvey, and border closures that have been unexpected, whether it's due to farmer protests, migration issues, or other issues that we've experienced. And we wanted to integrate this resiliency aspect because this has become a really hot topic as of late. And it's important not only to have a resilient freight network, but looking at the whole picture and looking at the supply chain and what are the impacts, and hearing today a lot about the emergency preparedness. That all plays a role in making sure our freight is moving safely and efficiently through our states. So I'm really excited as we start getting into the needs assessment, and we'll have our first draft final plan, our first rough cut in August of 22. So looking forward to that. We're also, after our statewide truck parking study we did in 2020, we are now working on district truck parking plans. So our first district will be in the Houston district. This is going to be really interesting. This is one of our districts that doesn't have any public safety rest areas. It's highly urbanized. So we're going to be looking at a lot of really different and innovative approaches of how we can work with the private sector, but also where can we as the public sector step in to help. So a lot of exciting work happening here in Texas, and we'll be starting a statewide freight resiliency plan towards the end of 2022 as well. Thank you.
Did we lose you, Caroline?
Nope, I'm right here. So next up, we have Dan from Tennessee.
Yes, good morning. Dan Palmer here, Freight Director in the state of Tennessee. Well, I'll say something different. We're not working on our freight plan because I've got a freight on call that I'm doing, and then hopefully from that we'll get one right on it. We don't have it till 2023 update on that, so we'll get on that here shortly. Like most of you have said, just really have staff really working on all the grants. We're submitting 3 for MPDG. It was great conversation. Good to know that Chrissy's going to be released in the next week or so. Obviously, some of the more interesting things, it's probably an update from different times, is we are undergoing a waterway research project that's going to kick off in August to look at potential ports on the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers that traverse through Tennessee. So we're interested in getting that kicked off. Really kind of the first time that we've really addressed waterways in the state of Tennessee other than the Mississippi River. So looking forward to that. Another unique thing that we had, and since I've heard it several times on this call today, we have it was a project that we did for Federal Highway under the old mega regions concept, a national economic partnership that we received federal funding that was in Chattanooga area, but also basically dealt with 5 different fields and commodities around Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia, and looked at it kind of like freight knows no state lines. So it looked at that. Well, we're duplicating that effort. We're working with the Memphis MPO. And if you're familiar with Memphis, it's in its district is part of North Mississippi, and then looking at Arkansas as well, since there's a huge intermodal facility right across the river. So really same type of looking at the freight flows, how they come in and their effects on rail, water, trucking as it goes. So that's kind of another thing that's kind of a little unique than other states. We did years ago, I talked about a competitive grant program, a rail competitive grant program that basically was looking at a couple things. It was jobs in rural areas. It was taking trucks off the highway. And it was potential future expansion for companies that are on short line railroads. We had 3 grants that have already been finished that is taking a significant amount of trucks off the roads onto rail. So we're looking at kind of remasking that program, and probably in the next 6 months or 8 months have another round of competitive grants that we will delve out to railroad authorities that can apply, and it'll be a competitive grant process. So looking forward to another round of that as we go forward. And with that, I'll just keep it short. Thank you, Carol.
All right, thanks, Dan. And next up, we have Eric Johnson.
Hey there. Sorry if if I'm in and out. My computer just told me that my internet was unstable, so I'm not sure what that means. So we just recently got our state freight plan update approved, and got the notice on that from our division office. And what really was able to finish that off was the fact that I had just completed our second statewide truck parking study. The first study that we had done back in 2015 was basically the result of a bunch of surveys and questionnaires, basically getting a scope of the problem in Virginia through the stakeholders. And this time we used the hard data from AASHTO to basically try to make a quantifiable, assessment of the truck parking needs around the state. And that report is available. I've given the presentation to our district planners and Hampton Roads freight TAC, their general TAC, so those two. And now on Thursday, I'm giving it to the National Capital Region. So the next phase for us really is going on building some educational tools for us to use. And I know that FHWA has offered some kind of a workshop, and we are joining in with some other states in the I-81 corridor on the topic. But we are also in that phase doing some tour-based origin destination study in the 81 corridor and the 95 corridor. In the 81 corridor, basically to support the truck parking situation there. That has a special place in our General Assembly's attention. They basically set up a task force for the whole corridor improvement, and a special group task force for the parking situation in 81. So truck parking is really a big deal here, as it is, I know, everywhere else. And working on our next phase of, acquiring data, working with the other agencies here to basically determine how we're going to do it. We might do it differently than we did before. So that's it.
All right, thanks, Eric. And next up, we have Mississippi.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. I apologize for not being able to attend in person. I had some scheduling conflict, but just like a lot of everyone else that's gone before me, we got our freight plan update that's occurring right now. Our expiration is actually in November. And so we are definitely more than halfway through, but I would love to borrow some time from Dan to kind of finish that off. But we have engaged our FAC actually in multiple meetings up to this point for the plan update. And then one thing I want to mention too, in terms of the multi-state freight compact findings, that new requirement, we're planning on incorporating some of our ITTS studies as part of that requirement. And for those that are unaware, ITTS is the Institute for Transportation Studies. It's a coalition of mostly southeastern states through transportation pool funds. So that's something that we'll try to leverage from that coalition there as part of that requirement for the freight plan new element there. So as far as the rail plan, that is currently under review by FRA. And then in terms of a program that we have internally here at the state, we have the Multimodal Transportation Improvement Program that is state funded. It's a discretionary kind of grant program as well that's available to our ports, airports, transit, public transit, and rails. And we kicked off that earlier this year. Our deadline is actually this past month. So we'll be looking at going through the award process within the next couple months there for it. Staying along the line of grants, we have sent in 3 grant applications for the raise, so keeping our fingers crossed there. And we're currently working on some grant applications right now, of course, for the MPDG, to take advantage of the rural and the infra and the mega where we can. And so moving on to another kind of element that we're working on right now. We are completing our alternative few corridors nomination for the 6th round, focusing on our interstates. And in that, we're doing that to kind of prepare us for the other project that we're working on right now, which is the EV development deployment plan for the state. Of course, that's due in August, and we have recently begun that effort. And we plan on engaging our FSC as part of that effort as well within the upcoming FSC meeting that we have at the end of May. And then just rounding off some of what we are currently working on, we are actually coordinating as part of IDTS, coordinating with the AASHTO conference that's going to be held later on this year in Mississippi. And so that's, for some of you may be familiar with IDTS as far as we normally have an annual Freight in the Southeast conference. So that's something that we are coordinating with, again, AASHTO to kind of get that in place for this year. And we've actually communicated with some of the members on the call already as well, with Ryan, Timothy, and Caitlin as being presenters at that conference as well. So there's more information on our ITTS website if y'all are interested. But that's going to wrap up the update for here with Mississippi. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And that's all the chats I received from anyone on the line to provide an update. This is the last chance for anyone to unmute their lines